Lord of Industrialization. Welcome back, brave explorers of impossible worlds. We are excited to have you here to continue this odyssey together. Before we continue, everything you'll hear is pure fiction. So please don't try to replicate combat techniques at home. This wonderful story in all its rights belong to its brilliant original author. We are only the messengers of entertainment. Want another dose of adventure? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single chapter. And if you can't wait, our Patreon has exclusive surprises you'll love. Chapter 26, The Pride and Hope of a Wessenland. The salt on the ship was quickly unloaded. The carriages here could hold twice as much cargo as elsewhere, and they moved remarkably smoothly. Near the dock, there was a place that specialized in purchasing salt. The staff randomly selected several barrels, placed a measured volume of salt into a conical graduated cylinder, and added water to dissolve it completely. The salt was allowed to settle for a moment, allowing the impurities to settle at the bottom of the cylinder. The salt was of good quality, first-rate quality. Because the barrels were sold separately, it took some time to pour out the salt, weigh it, and find other containers for it. As the two parties signed the contract, the cargo owner pointed to a clause and asked, "What's this stamp duty? I've never heard of it anywhere else." The middleman quickly explained, "It's a transaction tax invented by our young master after he took over. We buy a tax stamp proportional to the contract's value and affix it to the contract. In the event of a lawsuit, the court will first recognize the contract with a stamp as evidence. If you add taxes, the tax bureau will preserve the attachments for between 1 month and 50 years. Even after the expiration of the period, they can check the registration book for the names of both parties, the type and quantity of goods traded, and the price." The cargo owner immediately understood and exclaimed, "This method is great. It will make litigation much easier." "Yes," the middleman said. "We won't have to argue so much when we ask for the brokerage fee." Armand studied a stamp. It was a small piece of white cotton printed with red roses and green vines, with a year and month underneath. It could be glued to parchment. He pondered. The stamp tax rate wasn't high, but it was widely available, and merchants were happy to pay it, bringing in a considerable amount of money each year. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but feel curious about Frederick. After selling the salt and barrels, they set out to sell beans. As they reached the edge of the city, Armand suddenly noticed a group of children on the grassy lawn beside the wall. The youngest was over 3 years old, the oldest nearly 10. They sat in groups of about 10, each wearing a different colored hat. An adult was teaching them how to recognize objects, count, and sing nursery rhymes. The older ones were also teaching them how to read and do arithmetic. Armand asked in surprise, "Whose children are they?" The agent smiled and replied, "They're from here. My little one's here too. Look, the one wearing a green shirt under a white hat with a red rim." Armand spotted a child, about 5 years old, who, along with the others, placed their hands on their heads, imitating rabbit ears, and sang, "The little rabbits are hopping on the grass, their big ears waving happily to the rhythm." A smile appeared on his face and he said, "It's quite interesting." The intermediary brother smiled and said, "A while ago, Mr. BASF's newly opened workshop was short of staff, so he planned to recruit some women to work, but many women have to take care of the children at home, so Mr. BASF came up with a solution. He asked his fiancée to build this kindergarten, so that women don't have to take care of the children at home and go out to work." The news spread within 2 days. "My family discussed it and decided to send the child there as well. My wife is a tailor. She didn't have much work to do at home taking care of the children. Now she pays some money to let the kindergarten take care of the children, and she goes to work in the tailor shop. The family can get several more shiny silver coins a month. I send the child here early in the morning and go to the dock. In the evening, I pick my wife up after work and buy some steamed bread on the way. When I get home, the soup is cooked and we can eat. Look, the place where the house is being built over there will be the kindergarten building in the future. Now the children can only make do in the big tent. My little one didn't get to move into the new house, but I heard the young master plans to open a number of schools in the next 2 years, and children over 6 will learn writing, arithmetic, and so on. If they're promising, they can study magic at the University of Wessenland. If they can't go, they can go to the guild school and learn a trade." Armand suddenly noticed a hint of pride and hope for the future in the agent's chatter. He was familiar with this. Back in the military academy, when he and his classmates drank and talked about their future lives, they were just as proud and hopeful. But they were all children of the nobility. Their fathers the king's favorites, their godfathers the Gaulish marshals. The others' families were equally wealthy and promising, and all had bright futures. But for a commoner like this agent, with no military power, no financial resources, and no status, what did that bright future look like, and why was he so proud? Armand couldn't understand. The caravan carrying chickpeas soon arrived at the riverside mill. The agent went to the mill's manager and the owner to discuss the deal. After inspecting the goods, they signed the contract. The unloaded carriage was called away by another agent, and Armand and his companions headed for the nearby Ulina Chamber of Commerce. Armand paid special attention to the water wheels along the way, noticing how fast they were turning. It was nearing noon, and the weather was scorching hot, and everyone was sweating. Ulina Chamber of Commerce was its common name. The sign at the gate read Ulina Sugar Refinery in a white rabbit logo. The place looked a bit shabby, with the buildings newly built and many more still under construction. It was bustling, with carriages coming and going so fast that traffic was necessitated by a dedicated person. The houses near the gate were a revelation. The side of this row of wooden houses facing the street was bare. Behind them, near the river, stood several water wheels, simple pillars, filled with tables and chairs. Many people were eating and chatting. Near the sugar refinery, there was a counter, steam billowing from behind. None of this was the main point. The highlight was the fans powered by water wheels on the walls, which blew through curtains of water, bringing gusts of cool air to the sweltering summer day. After Armand and the others sat down, the agent called over the sugar factory salesperson and some ice crystals. "What is this?" Armand stared at the steaming ice jelly. He had never seen anything like it before. After Frederick had enjoyed the jelly, he whipped up an ice jelly made with agar. The chopped agar, combined with chilled malt syrup, became a popular summer treat in Wissenberg. The agent said, "It's so hot. These ice crystals cool down and quench your thirst." "It's a wonderful invention by the young master." Armand pointed to the sugar factory salesperson sitting across from him and asked, "Why doesn't he have any?" The salesperson smiled and shook his head, saying, "We have a rule, we can't eat things offered by guests." Armand nodded, spooned a little, and began to eat. It was cool and sweet, with an indescribable taste, but it was delicious. He had never tasted anything so interesting in the palace. Before he'd finished the ice crystals, the deal to exchange chickpea flour for Wiesen syrup had already been negotiated, with the goods to be picked up in 3 days. The agent paid his commission and was about to leave when Armand said, "I'd like to go look at steel this afternoon. Can you take me?" "Sure," the agent smiled brightly. The steel business was big business, and the commissions were hefty. He immediately ordered lunch and served the clients the most expensive steamed bread with salt and pork knuckle stewed with sauerkraut. In front of him was the cheapest steamed bread with bran and whole grains and sauerkraut. The guests from the Kingdom of Gaul examined the steamed buns for about 10 minutes before slicing them and eating them like bread. Armand glanced at the price list hanging on the pillar and couldn't help but ask the agent, "You're earning quite a bit today, so why are you still eating the cheapest?" The agent smiled and replied, "I heard from the kindergarten teacher that my child is quite smart. We've decided to save some money. If he really shows promise, we'll send him to the University of Wissenberg. The tuition there is quite high." Armand was impressed by the man's skillful work, efficient workmanship, and talkativeness. Wanting to give him a thumbs up, he said, "You can come to Paris and see me. I think Baron Wissenberg will recognize my letter of recommendation." The agent was stunned and shook his head. The young master said that the University of Wissenberg doesn't look at letters of recommendation or anything like that, only test scores. Armand couldn't help but understand one thing, why this man was so hopeful about the future. Chapter 27 Doubts. "Sir, here's your points card," Armand said, accepting what he later called the world's biggest trap from the restaurant owner. The restaurant's points card was a wooden plaque with the restaurant's name and address on the front and a 10x5 grid on the back. 4 of the 10 grids in the first row were stamped with iron-on stamps. With this card, customers could enjoy a 10% discount. Each cruise silver coin they spent marked 1 grid point, and after accumulating a row of grid points, they could receive an additional 10% discount on top of the existing 10%. That wasn't a problem. The problem was the combined prices of the various dishes, snacks, and drinks on the menu. Even with just 2 or 3 cruise silver coins, the change always exceeded 50 copper coins, tempting them to add dozens more to make up for the full cruise silver coin and earn a point. Armand didn't think much of it at first. He'd always spent money on a whim, never giving it much thought. He also failed to notice that an invisible demon kept whispering in his ear, "One more point gets you closer to a discount," causing him to unknowingly adjust the price of tonight's dinner to 4 crus 20 coppers while holding the menu. Before leaving, the restaurant owner gave him a points card for a nearby jewelry store. The owner, with years of experience, was certain that this young man must be from a wealthy family, and that the store, which specialized in young women's jewelry, would be the perfect place for him. By the time he left the restaurant, it was already dark. Armand and his 2 attendants were staying in a hotel across the street and didn't want to go back to bed just yet. He saw a tavern not far away and decided to go in and sit down, thinking it would be a good place to get some information, so he let his attendants wander freely. The tavern was quite crowded, so he found a seat and ordered the most expensive set menu from the menu. Soon, he stared at the plate of appetizers in front of him with a bewildered look. The few small, half-palm-sized, bow-shaped bread rolls were understandable, not much in reality, but the bacon slices, sausage slices, and pork skin jelly made him think this was dinner. The beer here was good. After just 2 sips, he was hooked. Armand leaned back in his chair, feigning boredom as he listened attentively to the conversations of the patrons at the tables around him. 2 pieces of news caught his attention. The sale of steel in Wesson County would be restricted starting tomorrow, something he'd already learned about that afternoon. The other was that Baron Wesson had begun requisitioning carriages and recruiting men. His purpose wasn't stated, but the pay was high, and it sounded like he was going on a long journey. Before he could listen any further, the tavern erupted in cheers. A wandering singer with a 6-string guitar walked to a corner and sat on a high stool. The singer seemed quite famous, and the men in the tavern fell silent. A burst of music erupted, and Armand nodded slightly, taking a sip from his glass. He understood music. This man was indeed skilled. First, a few traditional local folk songs depicting warriors in battle played. The music and singing captured the intensity of the battle vividly, reminding Armand of his first time riding into battle, charging against the Lissenberg army. The audience, all grown men, immediately became animated. Then the music suddenly changed. Its style drastically different from the traditional style. Armand felt a little uneasy, but the atmosphere in the tavern instantly heated up. "Rise and sing. We shall triumph. Our banners march forward, and we invite you to march with them. You will see the songs resound, the banners flutter, the dawn of victory, heralding the arrival of a new era." Every patron rose, raising their glasses, stamping their feet in unison, and singing "The people of the Rhine will never be defeated." Armand hesitated for a moment, not wanting to stand immediately. He felt several cold eyes on him. But soon after he was forced to stand, he was unconsciously swept up by the atmosphere. After a brief repetition, he joined the Rhine people in raising their glasses, stamping their feet, and singing. Those previously cold gazes warmed. A few bearded men, unbothered by his Gallic accent, clinked their glasses with his and emptied theirs. After finishing his beer, Armand felt a bit strange. The song celebrated Count Wesson, the 11 knights, and the over 200 soldiers who died alongside them, while he himself came from an enemy nation. But something even stranger lingered within him. Perhaps it was his admiration for Count Henry von Wesson's bravery, fearlessness, and loyalty that gave him a sense of kinship with these Rhinelanders, whom he had never met before. Sing the war song. Wave after wave. Without new battles, where will the future come from? But only through unity can we defeat our enemies. Fight side by side, and tomorrow we will be the victors. The tavern sang United Rhinelanders will never be defeated. Armand was initially uneasy about the new musical form, but young people are quick to adapt, and he gradually warmed up to it. Soon, he found it quite appealing and joined in the singing. He understood the song's meaning. The last war had been lost, and the Rhinelanders needed a new war and victory to regain their strength. However, after that war, the Confederation of the Rhine and the Kingdom of Gaul signed a 20-year peace treaty. The next war might be launched elsewhere. Because he is human, he needs food, but he was driven from his home. Wessenland, welcome him. Brothers, come here. Welcome to the Wessenland family. Because you're human, too. Because you're human, too, you need shoes and clothes, but you met William. Wessenland, welcome you. Sisters, come here. Welcome to the Wessenland family. The singing in the tavern suddenly grew heavy, and Armand felt as if he were in a church, singing by the finest choir in Gaul, perhaps even the world. This feeling had nothing to do with any singing technique, it came from the singer's heart. Armand was deeply moved. He knew full well that the song concerned the tens of thousands of refugees about to be driven into Wessenland, and that he himself had come for that very reason. He and many others believed that Wessenland would be on high alert, sealing all borders and doing everything possible to reject and expel the refugees. However, he discovered that all the outsiders were wrong. The people of Wessenland, from Baron Wessen down to the common people, didn't treat the victims as mere monsters. Instead, they treated them as their own suffering brothers and sisters and offered a helping hand. What kind of spirit was this? What kind of heart was this? What kind of land was Wessenland truly, to have such a beautiful flower of kindness blossom? Armand couldn't help but wonder. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28 First Meeting. After shopping at a jewelry store, a clothing store, and a glassware shop, Armand suddenly realized that if he didn't complete this trip quickly, he would have to hunt monsters to earn money for his journey home. So he immediately went to visit Frederick. "We admire Count Henry Wessen's bravery, fearlessness, and loyalty," Armand said to Frederick in fluent Rhineland. "We have recently heard of the unjust actions of your King William, and we are deeply indignant. We hereby entrust me as your representative to assist Count Wessen's family in this difficult time." Frederick had often heard that the Kingdom of God was a free and romantic country that valued all virtues. He had previously heard nothing of it, but now he saw it with his own eyes, and was shocked. On the coffee table between them lay a purple silk purse filled with gold coins. Without even glancing at the purse before him, Frederick replied sincerely, "I thank Monseigneur Armand and all my Gallic friends for your concern. Wessenland is indeed facing some difficulties, but I believe that with the efforts of all the people in the territory, we will overcome them successfully." Armand carefully observed Frederick's every move, trying to understand this child, not much older than himself. The news he had heard before arriving in Wessenland was starkly different from what he saw and heard after arriving. The people here weren't panicked or unsettled by the young lord or external conspiracies. Instead, they lived peacefully, full of hope for the future, and even devised various ways to exploit their wealth. As a pillar of the younger generation of his family and a favorite of the king, Armand had access to an education unmatched by most. This prosperous town was his classroom. It was precisely because of his experience governing a region that, after calming down, he could understand the difficulty of governing Wessenland. He didn't believe that simply singing a few songs could achieve this. There must be something else behind the scenes that he didn't know. Yet, for a moment, all he noticed was Frederick's attire, though simple and understated, looked quite sharp. Baron Wessen's young, that's his advantage. He hasn't experienced the lap of luxury, so he can handle a simple life, saving a lot of money. Armand mentally summed up the first point. Meanwhile, Frederick, smiling, was muttering to himself. He couldn't understand what was going on in the Kingdom of Gaul. Had his father's fans given him hundreds of gold coins? Were they sending him money because he was being tricked by his own king? What would this make others think? What would the king think? Was the Wessen family truly colluding with the enemy? Oh my god, could this be a divisive ploy? He suddenly realized he simply couldn't understand fans, no matter what world they were from. But this was nearly 2 kilograms of gold coins. He couldn't just have them carry it all the way back. While exchanging pleasantries, Frederick made a decision. Since the king had already broken off relations with him, he'd just take the money. As for the rest, as long as they publicize it properly, even if they claim it's bribery or something, people will simply assume they're lying because they were forced by the situation. Furthermore, Armand hasn't revealed his last name yet, nor when he called himself a fan, clearly treating this as a personal act. After the two exchanged pleasantries, Armand asked, "I have a question. Could you please clarify it?" Frederick nodded slightly and replied, "Please, sir." Armand asked, "How did you unite the people of Wessen County when it faced a huge crisis?" Frederick was taken aback. He hadn't expected that question. "It's simple," he replied, "by satisfying their needs." Armand, surprised, said, "But human desires are endless. To satisfy everyone's needs would be like filling up the ocean." Frederick didn't argue, simply smiled and said, "Yes, and nothing more." There was no further explanation, no explanation at all. Psychology is currently just a branch of philosophy, with a wide variety of theories. Because it lacks statistics, Many studies take individual cases as generalizations, resulting in no mainstream thinking. If you propose humanism, opponents will cite a dozen or 20 counterexamples and argue with you, asking if it's objective enough. If not, they'll have to bring 2 more horse-drawn carts. Explaining Maslow's hierarchy of needs to the people here is incredibly difficult, let alone using psychology to guide territory development. Meanwhile, Frederick, in order to absorb the impending disaster, has begun attempting to break free from the regional and ethnic ideologies entwined in feudalism and construct something more modern, nationalism. He's relying on the recent boom in the maltose and steel trade to back up the promise that the canal's opening will satisfy everyone's financial needs. He's also leveraging the external conflicts caused by King William's infuriatingly reckless actions to rally internal forces and anyone who can be united through nationalism, leading to a surge in morale within Wesson. Armand, however, was thinking, these things aren't something a child like Frederick could come up with. So, without knowing the details, he just made up an excuse, and when he was caught, he couldn't continue. In Weissenberg, if this ward master or cardinal had this kind of political knowledge, he would have long since sought the Duke's place. Therefore, Baron Wiesen must have a master behind him. However, the identity of this master remains unknown, most likely one of the scholars of Constantine. During the civil unrest in Constantine, many fled, including renowned scholars and lesser-known advisors. Each of these individuals was talented, well-spoken, and highly valued wherever they landed. Armand felt a surge of itch, wishing he could invite such a talent back. Hoping to meet this master, he'd spent 3 days eating and drinking here, but only saw Frederick around, a senior and experienced mafia boss from southern Sardinia. The day before Armand left, Frederick handed him a gift. "What's this?" Armand examined the object curiously. It was a regular hexagonal wooden box, made of precious wood and beautifully decorated. The lid was decorated with 6 different colored glass floral patterns. Opening the lid, he revealed a glass checkers set. The board and pieces were made of colored glass, with different colored pieces corresponding to different flowers. Frederick, with a formal smile on his face, said, "This is checkers, a small game that can be played by 1 person or with 6 people. It's a gift for Françoise." Armand was quite knowledgeable, and whenever he had free time these days, Frederick had asked him to tell him about the outside world. He then talked about his sister, Françoise, a girl 3 years older than Frederick. Frederick was preparing to proactively respond to the disaster victims, which required cultivating good relations with the local lords. He had prepared a number of small gifts as courtesy. Since 2 of the lords had children around his age, the gifts included 2 sets of the newly invented checkers. It would be inappropriate for Armand to come all this way and then send him back empty-handed, but Frederick didn't have many other gifts to offer, so he gave his sister these beautiful and interesting glass checkers. A nice touch? It turns out that in this area of lack of money for entertainment, small games like checkers that require a bit of brainpower are quite popular. After Armand learned the rules, he played with his left hand against his right hand all night long. Chapter 29 Action Meeting, Part 1. August was hot and oppressive, the sun scorching the earth, making one feel like they were living in an oven. In the castle garden, Psyche and Katie sat in a stone pavilion, drinking tea and discussing the paper mill. Both wore white long-sleeved shirts and the only blazers in the world. Beautiful people look good in anything. 2 days ago, when Katie, wearing a light green dress and a pink wide-brimmed hat, went to inspect the land leveling for the paper mill with Keller had a nosebleed from the heat. Roman's apprentices were incredibly busy, working overtime to meet orders from the castle maids and the use of the magic lamps. Previously, for fire safety reasons, lamps and candles were forbidden in the tailor shop. There was no other way around it. The weather had suddenly turned scorching hot in August. The elderly lamented that they had never experienced such heat in their lives. Even their luxurious dresses, even standing still, made them sweat. The men, no camels, chose color clothes over sweat. In the past, round-neck shirts were considered underwear, worn outside by farmers, laborers, shepherds, and the like while working. Now, however, things were different. Baron Wesson's shirts featured collars and pockets, making them clearly thin outerwear, not underwear. The round-necked pullovers were worn underneath. With the new shirts, everyone realized their bulging, colorful leggings were out of place. Frederick's straight-leg pants were loose and airy, so they changed. But a man couldn't go without accessories, so everyone's attention turned to the belt buckle. Frederick was a bit dazed during the meeting that day. Everyone in the room wore white shirts and dark trousers. The only thing missing was a thermos. Only Richardner looked gloomy. How could he have gone on a long journey to deliver a message, and upon returning, everyone had changed their clothes, while he sat there in his usual attire, looking out of place? As a military fortress, the castle naturally had a command post, but for safety, it was located in the very center, with only vents and no windows, making it incredibly hot and stuffy. This problem wasn't difficult. Several large blocks of ice quickly appeared in the corner, surrounded by a group of magicians. Today was the final meeting before the Wesson territory was about to depart to collect the victims. Barring any unforeseen events, Frederick would officially visit the Duchy of Mainz in 3 days. Prior to this, Richardnell, acting as a messenger, delivered Frederick's personal letter to the relevant territories, negotiated the crossing of the Wesson family caravan, and even visited the royal capital, Cologne. A full-length cotton map hung on the wall. Richardnell stood beside it, pointing a stick and reporting on the results of his visit. "I first visited Count Roth, Count Firth, and Count Ansbach," he said, pointing to the 3 counties northwest of Wessenland. "They agreed to allow us to use their routes to transport the victims, set up a transit camp, and promised not to create any obstacles. They are also willing to sell grain at the current market price." Frederick sneered and asked, "Are they really not going to do anything tricky?" These families, along with the Wesson family, were pawns planted by King William in this area. To the west of Wessenland was Ansbach, and to the north was Roth, through which the victims had to be transported. When King William shifted the blame onto Frederick's father, they all played a role in furthering Wessenland's misfortune, with several of their neighbors being particularly active. Richardnell also sneered, "They didn't dare. I hinted that if anything went wrong, we would abandon the victims there and not leave. They were so scared that they almost wrote a document." Frederick nodded. These victims were a bomb for him, but a deadly poison to the other lords. He also sent Richardnell as a messenger, intending to use this humanoid nuclear warhead as a deterrent to the neighbors. Just then, Alfu entered and whispered something in Frederick's ear. Everyone noticed he was considerably thinner than before. Frederick said, "Let him in. We won't hide this from him." A moment later, Alfu ushered in a burly middle-aged man. Without waiting for the man to salute, Richardnell smiled and said, "Oh, it's you, little lion." Lion Or was a renowned war contractor, or mercenary leader. In this idyllic era, the vast majority of the population engaged in agriculture, and few territories could afford to maintain a standing army. Only in those impoverished and desolate regions, where people could no longer survive, resorted to hard labor. For lords, hiring these professionals was more cost-effective than expending the vast sums of money on a standing army. Wesson County also had business dealings with mercenaries. Last year, Count Wesson hired Or during his campaign. When the supply camp was attacked, they were there to put out a fire, and they brought back the bodies of the people. For this reason, Frederick wrote to Or, stating he had a big business deal to discuss. Upon entering, Or first saluted Frederick, then greeted Richardnell, calling him teacher. Richardnell simply nodded. Frederick pointed to the end of the conference table and said, "Please take a seat. We'll discuss your matters later." Or obediently sat down. Richardnell pointed to a map and continued, "Now, there's bad news. The victims have been driven by lords from various regions to the areas along the Rhine and Main rivers, and are now traveling upstream. They don't know where Wessenland is. Many have never traveled more than 10 kilometers from home in their entire lives. Initially, they thought it was close, but long-term displacement and an uncertain future have gradually dispelled the rumors that they could survive in Wessenland. The victims are moving very slowly now. Local lords usually send people to give them some food to keep them from starving and then drive them on. The victims are in very poor condition, with only the clothes on their backs, and many are sick. It's okay in the summer, but I'm afraid they won't survive the winter. But there's good news. This time, I went to Cologne to see Archbishop Victor. After discussions, he agreed to dispatch priests from the Rhine Archdiocese to aid the victims. Churches along the way provided food and medicine to the victims. He also gladly accepted the offer to send priests to Wesson County. Frederick nodded gently. In a magical world, the status of religion is constantly shifting. In the days of primitive magic, religion emerged due to people's mystics surrounding natural phenomena and magic. But as magic advanced, they could no longer boast of so many miracles, otherwise Richardnell and others could perform them live for you. Many years ago, the Church of Light, a medical organization, rose to prominence through its expertise. After growing from the grassroots, it thrived on the fear and despair of the working class over the immense suffering caused by the exploitative system, and the exploiting classes need to use this as a means of psychologically numbing and controlling the masses. The Earth cult in the far west of this continent, the Nature Church in the far north, and the Flame Church in the southern continent followed a similar path. Frederick's current partnership with Archbishop Victor, who was at a disadvantage in the internal strife, was a win-win for both sides. Richardnal continued, I met with Archduke Dalberg in Mainz. He was very grateful to Baron Wesson for his kind offer to transport the victims and agreed to set up a shelter within the Duchy of Mainz, choosing Lohr as the location. Frederick raised an eyebrow and said, Lohr? What a coincidence. Their lord, Baron Philip von Eltel, will be visiting tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Richardnal pointed to Lohr on the map with his pointing stick and said, it's on the main river, surrounded by mountains. Frederick understood, but he wondered what Baron Eltel would think upon hearing this. Richardnal drew his pointing stick from Lohr to Wesson, saying, there hasn't been any heavy rain in the area for nearly a month, and water transportation has been greatly affected. I'm afraid the original plan for transport by water will be impossible. Frederick nodded and asked the old knight Franz to come to the map and explain the plan for transporting the victims. However, Franz did not go up, instead allowing his son, Franz the Younger, to appear. Chapter 30 Action Meeting, Part 2. Among the knights of the Wesson family, Franz the Elder was the oldest and most experienced. In his youth, he had accompanied Frederick's grandfather on numerous campaigns, conquering the Wesson territory. Age is merciless, and while a warrior can maintain peak strength for extended periods, their strength, unlike that of Richardnal, declines rapidly once their bodies age. Franz had a son in his middle age, Franz the Younger, now in his 20s, who had traveled extensively 5 years ago and had only recently returned to Wesson territory. Knowing he was ready to retire, Franz the Elder, while he still had a voice in the family, wanted to have his son appear before Frederick. Although Franz the Younger was the strongest of the younger generation, Frederick hadn't seen him for most of his life, and Franz the Elder felt he was little more than a stranger to his master. When Frederick noticed that it was Franz the Younger approaching the map, he said with a playful smile, if you don't explain well, you'll have to specialize in collecting bird eggs from now on. Franz the Elder breathed a sigh of relief, realizing his master still remembered his son. Little Franz took the pointer from Richardnal, smiled at Frederick and the others, and began to explain the plan for transporting the disaster victims. The distance from Lohr to Wiesenberg is about 200 kilometers, and the first stop into Wessenland is Hausen. I happen to be traveling this route on my way back. Camps can be set up approximately every 40 to 60 kilometers along the way. Besides Lohr and Hausen, 3 camps are needed along the way. He then pointed to 3 locations on the map and continued, there are fallow fields along the roadside here, with abundant, clean water nearby, making them suitable for camping. A single carriage run between the camps would take a morning or afternoon. We could transport people in the morning and deliver supplies in the afternoon. Everyone in the meeting room nodded in approval. He was very thoughtful. Setting up a camp wasn't just about finding a flat spot. First, you had to consider water resources, and secondly, the landowner's wishes. Setting up camp in fallow fields would ensure the camp's use, not only because the surrounding farmland would have water, but also because the manure and urine from the horses and men would fertilize the fields. The landlord wouldn't complain, and would likely be eager for more, ensuring a bountiful harvest next year. The distance between camps was also reasonable, as the horses needed to rest after pulling for half a day, otherwise overexerting themselves would harm their health. Each campsite would be divided into 5 sections, Franz Jr. continued. 1 for entire families, 1 for all men, 1 for all women, 1 for orphans, and the last for our men and horses. We might find some of the women to care for the orphans. Frederick nodded, seeing his careful consideration. After young Franz finished, Frederick said, very good. You two will be in charge of external transport. Old Franz will stay in Lohr, and young Franz will do more traveling, covering the 3 camps further back, Jurgen, Lothar, and Andrei. He named 3 of the younger generation's best. Each of you will be in charge of a camp. Do you have any problem with my arrangement? Old Franz, a knight of a prominent noble family, was in Lohr, making it much easier to deal with people. Jurgen and the others were second-generation knights, and as long as they didn't act recklessly, they would soon be canonized. The neighbors knew about this and wouldn't give them any hard time. This arrangement was naturally a no-brainer. Or, watching from the end of the table, was a bit surprised. Having been a mercenary leader for so many years, he'd seen all sorts of nobles. There were cases of people like Frederick taking on leadership roles before they were 10 due to family turmoil. However, these young men were often accompanied by a loyal and trusted advisor or a powerful confidant who effectively held the reins. The young men were merely figureheads. He initially assumed the same thing was happening with Frederick, but as the meeting continued, he realized he was wrong. Frederick was giving orders like an adult, and the others took it for granted. Next, Administrator Frick approached the map. He was in charge of the territory and would be stationed in Hausen. Frick pointed to the small triangles scattered throughout Wesson territory on the map with his pointing stick and said, "These places are where the new villages are located. Currently, the victims will rest in the camp in Hausen town for 3 to 5 days before walking there. The training of the village heads of each village has been completed, and the villages have been allocated by drawing lots. How the actual work will go we'll have to wait and see. Now is the slack season for farming, and 4,000 people have been recruited to carry out preliminary land clearing and digging wells at the side of the new village. When the new villagers arrive, they will first live in tents, while we will cut down trees to build walls, houses, and roads. We suspended steel exports last month, and now the blacksmith shop is making tools, so we can catch up. We have also invited carpenters who can build houses from carpenter guilds and other places. The first group of people arrived yesterday. If nothing goes wrong, everyone can move into the new house before winter, and we can start clearing Wasteland next spring. The resettlement work is very complicated, and Frick picked out food, clothing, housing and transportation as the key points to report." After listening to this, Frederick said, "If there is not enough room, then let's squeeze in. How about winter clothes now?" Frick nodded and continued, "The calico and cotton have been bought. Mr. BASF provided a lot of soles and waterproof cloth. Now we have gathered many people who can sew in Wesson to sew clothes, cloth shoes and tents, in order to enable them to work better. Many temporary kindergartens have been opened in the city and town to help take care of the children." Frederick asked, "Is the wage enough?" Frick replied, "Part of the wages is paid with food, and some require steamed bread. There is no problem with the wage expenses. Where's the food?" Frederick asked again. Frick replied, "At present, our food supply is slightly more abundant than originally planned, so it will not be a problem in the long run. Right now, Nina's steamed bun workshop is working overtime overnight to make steamed multigrain bread, and students from the University of Wiesenberg are helping to make condensed soup, which is packed in bags provided by Mr. BASF. Mr. Manuel is leading his students to kill insects in the steamed bread and condensed soup. Mr. Manuel said that after the insects have been killed, the steamed bread and condensed soup will not go bad for at least 2 months as long as the bags are not opened. Objectively speaking, they can be kept until next year. We in Wiesen now have more than 1,800 carriages of various sizes, and we have currently requisitioned 500 modified carriages," Frederick said at this time. "These carriages are grouped by region, with 10 carriages and a team, referring to the army formation. This makes management easier. Franz, you have to help Frick deal with this matter. There are 2 Franz here, one old and one young." The 2 fathers and sons didn't know who the master was talking about for a moment, and didn't know who to answer. With a wicked grin, Frederick said to little Franz, "Why don't you be more self-disciplined? You still want to get married without our administrator's approval." The conference room instantly filled with cheerful laughter. The younger generation, who had grown up together, and little Franz as their leader, were the most cheerful. Blushing, little Franz accepted the task. Frederick looked at Orr, who sat farthest from him, and asked, "What do you think of my terms?" Orr put on a scowl and said in annoyance, "Baron Wesson's terms are causing a bloodbath here." His words startled everyone in the conference room. They wondered, "We were just cooperating, why did someone die, and what a big deal?" Richardnell, knowing his character, feigned anger and said, "Let's get to the point. The last time you mentioned the bloody waves, it was your wife who chased you around the village twice with an axe." Orr winced through his laughter and said seriously, "Baron Wesson asked me to hire 200 veterans as sheriffs. The terms were incredibly generous. 500 or 600 people applied, many of them officers." Frederick smiled. The offer was standard in terms of salary and land, but the catch was that after 5 years of service, he could recommend a young person to study at the Wiesenberg school. Those who passed the exam could then attend Wiesenberg University. He also revealed that Sword Saint Richardnell was the vice president of Wiesenberg University and would mentor its students. This was a deadly allure for the mercenaries. Or continued, I've kicked out those who were cheating on the food. I still have 500 left. I've brought them all here for you to choose from. Frederick thought for a moment, then said to old Franz, go and select the sheriffs. The rest, if they're willing, can stay. Those who can recommend someone after 5 years will receive the same benefits. We're expanding the army next year. The people of Wesson were not surprised by the expansion, who knew what tricks the king would pull in the near future. With this matter settled, or moved on to the next item, suppressing the monsters in the forest is a business, no problem. I can take it. As agreed, all profits will belong to me. Frederick nodded and replied, yes, land reclamation is a struggle between humans and beasts for survival. Only when they are well fed can they have the strength to protect the environment and wildlife resources. The assembly force within Wesson was extremely weak, making this task perfect for the mercenaries. Jed, Heinz, Bernd, Matthias, Stefan, Oliver, Michael, Miroslav. Frederick called out the names of the younger generation. Each of you will be responsible for an area, leading mercenaries and hunters to eliminate monsters. 4 young people. This is a rare opportunity to lead troops. After the big things were discussed, everyone discussed the details again. Before adjourning the meeting, Frederick solemnly promised, I will bring a few more gold objects to the executive yuan tomorrow, and we will sell them if the money is not enough. In short, the wages of those who participated in this operation must be sufficient, not just them. In December this year, you and all the staff of Wesson territory will receive 2 months' salary. In June next year, if the territory has been stabilized, I will give everyone 3 months' salary. Chapter 31 International Situation. The castle's living room was quite cool, unaffected by the scorching sun outside. Don't be anxious, have a cup of tea first. Frederick poured a cup of his own iced black tea for the visiting Baron Philip von Eltel. Philip took a sip of the iced tea and found it tasty, which calmed him down. The fact that King William had driven the refugees to Wessenland was now known to the world, and for a time the Rhine River basin was filled with resentment. Philip had been worried from the beginning that the refugees would pass through his territory along the main river, but now he didn't have to worry, as they would rest in his territory. This was terrible. Now there were rumors everywhere that these refugees were possessed by demons, and they would cut every earthworm they saw into 2 pieces, eating 1 piece today and saving the other for tomorrow. Philip put down the empty teacup, looked at Frederick and said, you are quite patient, but that's true. When I came to visit 3 years ago, you didn't say a word and just sat there quietly. Frederick put down his teacup, curled his lips, and said depressedly, actually, I had changed my teeth early at that time. Philip didn't know what to say for a moment. Frederick asked solemnly, is Baron Eltel's visit about the unresolved matter from 3 years ago, or about the victims of this disaster? Philip was startled. This turn of the conversation was unexpected, but as a seasoned diplomat, he remained shrewd and asked calmly, does Baron Wesson know about what happened 3 years ago? Frederick looked him straight in the eye and spoke calmly, the Duchy of Mainz, the Duchy of Bane, and the city of Nuremberg are the 3 largest factions in the Southern Rhine Confederation. The Dukes of Mainz and Bane hold the power to influence candidates for the throne. Ever since the Osmagian Empire defeated the Second Purian Empire and split the empire, indirectly controlling the eastern capital and the vast plains to the north, only the Rhine Confederation has remained, lingering in the mountainous valleys for just over 100 years. The original imperial family was fragmented, and the descendants of the last emperor became kings of the Rhine Confederation. The various regions have long been dissatisfied with the royal family, and only managed to unite under the pressure of the Osmagian Empire and the Kingdom of Gaul. The Osmana Empire is currently in turmoil over the succession to the throne. The kingdoms of Gaul and Luxembourg are locked in a protracted war. Our King William sought to seize the opportunity to conquer the Low Countries, but was ultimately defeated. At this point, if the Duchy of Mainz, the Duchy of Bane, and the city of Nuremberg merged, it wouldn't be impossible for them to become one nation. That's why the late king, with foresight, sent several of our families to disrupt the 3-way border in his final moments. 3 years ago, Your Excellency visited us, hoping to have our Wesson family join your forces, but my father refused. As he finished speaking, the living room fell silent. A moment later, Philip applauded. Well said, he said with a smile. Except for the last point, which is incomplete, everything else is correct. Who taught you that? Frederick shrugged and said casually, I could figure it out by looking at the map. Philip, of course, didn't believe it. Like everyone else, he believed Frederick was backed by a hidden master. If an 8-year-old could come up with such ideas on his own, it would be absurd and beyond Cancerian. Have you ever studied heraldry? Philip asked a seemingly unrelated question. Frederick was about to say he had, but his heart suddenly skipped a beat, and a moment later, his mouth dropped open in surprise. The heraldic designs of noble families are carefully chosen. They must highlight the family's status, the characteristics of its territory, and its honor. Philip's territory had a river running through it, and their coat of arms featured a blue river running through green farmland, somewhat resembling the Chinese character. The Wesson family's coat of arms featured the castle in the center, with blue wavy lines at its base representing the river. These weren't the main points. The main point was the eagle above the castle. Long ago, an emperor of the Second Principality was exceptionally fertile, fathering more than a dozen children with 4 successive empresses. After centuries of intermarriage and fiefdom, many noble families now had an eagle in their coats of arms. However, these nobles were mostly found in the fertile plains of the north. Frederick's great-grandfather had his land seized, and he later joined the previous king, who then sent him to seize territory in the southern mountains. Here, descendants of Prince Jing of Shongshan were relatively rare. Really? Frederick asked in surprise. Are you planning to push our family into the spotlight as puppets? Philip was even more surprised. If it were history and international affairs, someone could teach them, and Frederick, with his excellent memory, could recite long passages. But as soon as he mentioned heraldry, the little guy immediately thought of his own plans, even thinking of being a puppet. What on earth was wrong with his brain? In order to test whether this little guy is an absurdly smart genius, Philip asked, "So what's your answer?" Frederick immediately said seriously, "Don't worry, sir, we will build a shelter camp in your territory far away from the town and in the fallow fields. It will not affect the territory and can also provide compost for the fields. This is a win-win situation. Please rest here for one night. I have prepared a special carriage for Wesson. I will set off with you after breakfast tomorrow. We will reach Lower by noon at all costs. After I meet with the Grand Duke of Mainz, my people will go to Lower to receive the victims." Philip looked at this monster quietly and then picked up the teapot to pour tea for himself. "There is a piece of news I can reveal to you in advance." At this time, Philip regarded Frederick as a nobleman who was equal to himself, no longer a child. "I didn't achieve any results during my visit to the Duchy of Bavaria this time." Frederick thought for a while drinking tea and said, "There are still results. You two had a frank conversation, exchanged views, and enhanced understanding. Since you want to merge, one party must be the leader in terms of power. However, the Duchy of Mainz and the Duchy of Bavaria are equally powerful, and now they can't merge through marriage. No one wants to be left behind." "That's right," Philip nodded and said, "in the foreseeable future, the Duchy of Mainz, the Duchy of Bavaria and the Wesson family will become the forces that divide the southern part of the Rhine Alliance, and no one can do anything to the other." Frederick just drank tea calmly, without showing any happy expression because of the other party's flattery. "Forget it," he said, setting down his teacup. "I still owe King William 5,000 florins. By the way, won't the Duchy of Mainz come to us to buy more steel? Although we're temporarily suspending steel exports to ensure our own needs, we'll be able to resume large-scale supplies next year after the new workshop opens." The waterway to the north from Wessenland passes through the Duchy of Mainz, which controls the main channels for sourcing raw materials and selling finished products. He didn't mind giving a little profit to the second-hand dealers. Business also requires social etiquette. Phillips was tempted. Steel was a strategic resource, and the price in Wessenland was much lower than elsewhere. Whether he used it himself or resold it, he would make a profit. This business was viable. Frederick continued, "If you can facilitate the steel trade between Wessenland and the Duchy of Mainz, I'm willing to pay a 1% commission." The next day, after seeing Philip's daughter, the man raised his commission to 2%. Chapter 32 Maria. In his past life, Frederick had seen many beauties, big and small, and now here, he'd seen even more. The castle's blonde maids, Katie from the south with a traditional First Puritan Empire look, the dark-skinned pagan merchants on business, and Psyche with the charm of the Sea of Idrus. He'd thought he'd never again be tempted by beauty. But when he saw Philip's 6-year-old daughter, Maria, run out of the castle and across the drawbridge toward him, his heart rate soared. Maria's skin was as white as winter snow, her features delicate and adorable as a doll's, her cheeks rosy like a ripe apple, her laughter ethereal, and her hair and eyes as black as charcoal, just like Katie's, the First Puritan Empire. Philip happily embraced his daughter, not noticing the pig beside him. A glance startled Frederick, bringing him back to his senses. A noblewoman emerged from the castle gates. Like Maria, she had dark hair and eyes, and gazed at Frederick with a half-smile. Philip's wife, Sophia, approached the carriage and said to her daughter, "Hurry up and greet the guests." The father and daughter, still sharing their longings, only then realized there was someone beside them. After a few introductions, Maria gently lifted the hem of her skirt with both hands, bowed, and said, "Greetings, Baron Wesson, and welcome to Lurk." Her large, watery eyes curiously surveyed the strangely dressed peer before her. Frederick, regaining his composure, smiled and said, "Greetings, Miss Eltel, it's a pleasure to meet you." He then turned to Sophia and was surprised to notice her pale complexion and sunken eyes, suggesting illness. After a round of greetings, Sophia took Frederick's hand and said, "You're welcome here. It feels just like home." Frederick quickly replied, "I'm sorry to bother you, Mom." "No problem," Sophia said, pulling him towards the castle. "Our hiking trails are famous. They offer something fun every season. Come visit often. It's been hot this summer, but it's cool in the mountains. If you're interested, you can go and have a look soon." Philip, holding his daughter's hand, followed behind. After only a few steps, he sensed something was amiss in his wife's words. Someone had returned with a quick message yesterday, and Sophia had already prepared lodgings for Frederick and his servants in the castle. Considering the fatigue of the journey, lunch wasn't lavish, but it was substantial. Arriving in the dining room, Frederick noticed a number of Wesson buns spread out on the table. The Wesson bun had spread throughout the area, but the filling between the two slices of bread had been replaced with a local specialty. And because eating it in large bites seemed unrefined, the buns were not large, easily finished in 2 or 3 bites. At the hostess's invitation, Frederick picked up a small Wesson bun, and his eyes lit up immediately after taking a bite. It was unknown what spices were added to the fried beef patties, but after being sliced and fried, the flavor was mellow, unlike the ones in Wesson County. The green sauce was made with cilantro, sorrel, borage, anise, chives, curly parsley, and dill. It had a light flavor and a unique aroma. If Goldon had made that pot of stuff taste like this, Hellscream would have drunk 2 more bowls. There was also cheese with a slight yogurt flavor and fresh vegetable leaves, and the combination tasted quite good. Now Frederick's appetite had begun to grow. And a small Wesson bun was naturally not enough to fill his stomach. Seeing Sophia chatting with Philip, he reached out and took another one. By the time he'd finished his 4th, he'd noticed Maria, across the table, grinning at him. So he asked, "What's so good about you?" Maria replied, "You're eating so much," Frederick said, "Because it's delicious." The little girl pouted and said, "You eat so much, and I won't have anything left." Speechless, Frederick quickly changed the subject. "I brought you a toy. I'll teach you how to play with it later, okay?" At the mention of a toy, Maria, regardless of whether her father was full, curiously inquired, "What toy is it? Is it fun?" It turned out that in this age of toy scarcity, checkers was a real draw for children. Especially since Frederick had to win 2 games and lose 1, the little girl ended up dragging him along to play checkers all afternoon. In his study, Philip finished lunch and began to sort out the work he'd accumulated from his trip. Sophia came into the study and said accusingly, "You're so tired from the journey, why don't you take a break?" Philip was reading a letter of appointment from the Grand Duke of Mainz appointing him governor of the glass mirror workshop. He put it down and said, "Baron Wesson's carriage is very special. It's fast and not bumpy, so it's not tiring to ride in. When I'm done with this, I'll buy you one from him so you can go out more often." Sophia sat down in the chair in front of the desk and waved the maid away, leaving the couple alone in the study. "What do you think of Baron Wesson?" Sophia asked. Philip replied, "He's been a very smart child since he was young. He has an excellent reputation in the territory. His vassals are loyal to him. Now he has the sword master Richardnal and an unknown teacher to guide him. His potential is limitless." Sophia asked again, "Is he engaged?" "I haven't heard of it," Philip said, startled. "Do you think?" Sophia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked to the bookshelf, took out a thick volume, and placed it in front of her husband. "You have been busy outside, so I will take care of Maria's affairs," she said. "Here are the suitable candidates within a radius of 300 kilometers. Take a look." The expression on Philip's face changed in a breath. Instead of flipping through the booklet, he asked, "Where did you get this?" Sophia replied, I heard about it in the salon and asked someone to verify it. Philip was speechless. Noble ladies have their own set of social circles. Not to mention national affairs, all kinds of family news spread quickly and true. Maybe his daughter's information is also filed in other people's homes. Don't be so hasty, he said softly to his wife. Maria is only 6. It's too early to discuss marriage. A helpless, bitter smile crossed Sophia's pale face. She sighed. You know your own body. I'm afraid I won't be able to wait until then. Philip stood up and walked behind his wife, placing his hands on her shoulders. He said softly, don't worry, there will be a way. Baron Wesson has a number of scholars from Constantine, the East Pole Empire. I'll ask them later. Maybe there's a solution. Sophia simply smiled slightly, reaching out her right hand to gently pat her husband's hand on his left shoulder, then squeezed it tightly. She had heard her husband say similar things many times over the years, and had consulted many doctors and pharmacists, but in the end, there was no other solution except to eat and drink well and endure the symptoms and take some medication that only treated the symptoms. Sophia tilted her head, rested her face on the back of her husband's hand on her right shoulder, and whispered, the only thing I'm worried about is Maria. I'm worried that someone will bully her after I'm gone. I think Baron Wesson is a good guy. You said he's smart, and he has a sword master as his master. He won't let Maria suffer no matter what. Philip would not directly refute his wife at this point, and said softly, they are still young, let's talk about it in a few years. At this time, Maria felt that it was no longer challenging for her to beat Frederick in checkers, so she took out her toys to play. She took out a cylindrical object from the box and pulled Frederick to the highest watchtower in the castle. Lore is surrounded by mountains, and birds fly up from time to time. Look, Maria proudly handed the monocular to Frederick. Use this to see the birds in the mountains and the lambs in the fields. Chapter 33 Who knows whether life is easy or not? A large field by the river was covered in lush, green vetch, freshly harvested, only palm high. A flock of sheep grazed the grass. White clouds drifted across the sky, the weather less sweltering than in recent days. A wooden dragonfly spun into the air, soaring for a moment into the distance before, exhausted, landing on the grass. A melodious laugh echoed, and Maria, dressed in riding gear, ran over, picked up the wooden dragonfly, rubbed it vigorously in her snow-white hands, and the new toy soared into the air once more. The underside of the wooden dragonfly's leaves was painted with vibrant pigment, and from the ground, it appeared as a series of interlocking colored circles. The Grand Duke of Mainz had a great-grandson, slightly younger than Frederick, and this wooden dragonfly and many other toys were originally intended for him. Now they belonged to Maria. A white awning with beautiful tassels had been erected on the grassy ground below the riverbank, and a thick carpet had been spread on the ground. Sophia unloaded the fruit, snacks, and lunch from the basket and placed them in the middle of the rug. She was now lighting the teapot on a shelf beside it. Although the weather was still hot, Sophia didn't dare give her daughter iced tea, as it could easily upset her stomach. Lighting the fire was simple. Place the charcoal in the stove, hold your finger over it like a flamethrower, and let it burn for a while. Selling matches in this world didn't bring much money. Nearly half of healthy adults could create a small flame. However, there was a market for magic lighters, with their exquisitely crafted shells and beautiful decorations. After finishing her work, Sophia looked out into the distance. Her parasol was still on the riverbank. Frederick had just mentioned he needed to paint, so she'd lent it to him to provide some shade. Frederick was currently sketching a charcoal layout of the refugee camp on a piece of parchment. He had been here 3 days. Yesterday, through Philip, he requested a meeting with the Grand Duke of Mainz, only to receive news that the Grand Duke and his family were on a spa vacation. Philip was also granted the authority to command 500 duchy soldiers to guard the territory, sell a ration of grain from the warehouse, and impose a certain number of forced labor. He also suggested that the relevant territories prepare for disaster relief and other work. It was clear that King William was plotting to entrap Frederick. The Grand Duke of Mainz didn't want to appear to be opposing the king by directly aiding Frederick after negotiations with the Duchy of Bavaria collapsed. So, the Grand Duke and his family went on a spa vacation in the sweltering heat, avoiding Frederick. He granted Philip, who bore the brunt of the responsibility, several powers, and then asked the other territories to cooperate. This excuse clearly showed that the Grand Duke of Mainz was trying to displease the king. Frederick didn't care. Getting the job done was paramount. The immediate priority was to build a shelter. Wesson had already sent word, and Philip was using his newfound authority to mobilize manpower and resources to assist. For one thing, the firewood alone was a considerable sum, and trees couldn't be felled randomly, they had to be cut from designated firewood forests. To expedite the process, Frederick went to the fields where the camp would be set up for a field survey, ready to begin work as soon as his men arrived. Sophia, assuming he was out for fun, brought her daughter along. But Frederick didn't have the time, so he left Maria to her own devices. A campsite isn't just about pitching a tent, it involves everything from eating, drinking, urinating, and sleeping to where to store supplies, where to use the kitchen, where to live, and where to install toilets, all of which needed to be carefully considered. Weissenberg's architectural experts had provided a template, but the design needed to be optimized on-site based on actual conditions, such as where to source water. Even plans needed to be made for the disposal of bodies in the event of a death in the camp. "What are you drawing?" Maria, having played with her wooden dragonfly, sat down next to Frederick, their distance just 5 fists width apart, the perfect balance between lady and gentleman. At this time, the clouds that blocked the sun moved away. Frederick gave her the parasol and said, "We are going to build a camp here. Are we going to build a new castle?" Maria shouted happily, "Can the castle be purple? There are purple flowers everywhere in the spring. It's very beautiful." Frederick shook his head and said with a smile, "No, there are just a lot of tents. Many people stay here for a few days and then leave." Maria didn't know if she understood. The little girl jumped to other things. "Oh, will you come here next spring when the flowers bloom? There are purple flowers everywhere, and there are little bees and beautiful little butterflies. It's fun." Frederick replied, "Next year there will be wheat in the fields, and there will be purple flowers on the other side of the river." "Ah!" Maria widened her beautiful big eyes in surprise. "Why do the purple flowers and wheat have to move?" Frederick smiled and said, "Because they are good friends. Next year, the purple flowers will go to play with the wheat, and the wheat will go to play with the purple flowers. As a result, they both found that their good friends are not at home." "Really?" Maria asked in disbelief. "It's true," Frederick said seriously. "Come here next spring and you'll see. Chinese milk vetch is the most common fallow crop in the area. It's planted in the fall and blooms from spring to early summer the following year, providing nectar for bees. After the flowering season, it's harvested and used as livestock feed. In late summer, the whole plant is plowed into the field along with its rhizobium-infected roots as green manure, and then wheat is planted. The fields across the river have already finished harvesting beans and are being plowed. Chinese milk vetch will be planted in late September." Maria, bewildered, uttered several O's. Sophia waved the two children back for snacks. Maria ran a few steps with her parasol, glanced at the riverbank under the scorching sun, and returned to Frederick. "Come on," the little girl said proudly, "I'll hold the umbrella for you." As she spoke, she held the parasol up and began crying, so that Frederick could also be shaded. However, the parasol's handle and ribs were made of wood, making it quite heavy. The little girl's hand began to tremble after just a moment of holding it. Frederick took the parasol and decided to do it himself. Servants brought kettles for the two to wash their hands, and Sophia told them to help themselves to whatever snacks they wanted. Frederick shoved a few pieces of gingerbread onto his plate and set it beside him, eating as he finished his blueprint. He exclaimed, looking at the bitten piece of gingerbread. "Delicious." It was a tradition here to use ginger to nourish the stomach. Sophia handed him a piece of applesauce pie drizzled with honey and said with a smile, "Try more if you like." "Thank you." Frederick took the pie and set it aside. "I'll finish my blueprint first, then I'll eat." He continued to work on the ceramic pipe connecting the pump to the water tank. Maria's mouth was full of the applesauce pie, and Sophia gently wiped the corners of her mouth with a handkerchief. "Why are you eating so fast?" Sophia asked. "Your mouth is full," Maria replied. "I thought the pie wasn't good." "Why not?" Sophia was puzzled. Maria said, "Look, Mom, Frederick isn't eating. Maybe he doesn't think it's good." Sophia turned and saw Frederick sitting on the carpet, writing and drawing on parchment with a look of intense concentration. She wanted to say something, but gave up. Her husband occasionally had that expression, always when he was dealing with something very important. Frederick suddenly realized that the original camp plan hadn't taken into account requirements like fire evacuation, so he made some adjustments. After he finished his revisions and put down his pencil, he heard Sophia ask, "Just let others do these trivial things. Why tire yourself out?" A hint of bitterness crossed Frederick's smile, and he said wearily, It can't be helped. I'm the only one left in the Wesson family now. I'm too young, which is a disadvantage. It's easy for people to harbor malicious intent. To prevent my subordinates from harboring such thoughts, I have to do everything right, to the best of my ability, leading them from victory to victory. Only then can they be convinced of me, admire me from the bottom of their hearts, and at the same time fear me, preventing them from harboring any ulterior motives. One must know one's own affairs. Managing a territory is not that simple. Human hearts are the most unpredictable and dangerous. First, he couldn't gauge others' favorability towards him, and second, he didn't have absolutely loyal summoners to base himself on. He could only strive to cultivate the image of a prodigy to ensure his subordinates' confidence, or at least to raise the bar for betrayal. Tired, huh? Sophia reached out and gently stroked Frederick's hair, feeling sorry for this little boy, only slightly older than her daughter. Frederick forced a smile and said nothing, simply watching the approaching flock of sheep. If he didn't want to become a fat sheep at the mercy of others, he had no choice but to endure this exhaustion. Maria, who hadn't understood the preceding conversation, only her mother's comment that Frederick was tired, continued, "If you're tired, you should get more sleep. Want me to sing for you?" "Father sleeps soundly after hearing me sing." Frederick smiled and said, "Sure, I love to hear songs." Maria immediately put down her candied fruit and began to sing. Frederick knew her voice was beautiful, but he was surprised that her singing was so beautiful that even the word heavenly wasn't enough. The joyful sound of her voice touched his soul, calming him down. Not only him, but also the sheep and sheepdogs nearby heard the singing and were immediately drawn in. They gathered in a circle around the carpet, listening quietly to Maria's song. After a while, even birds landed on the awning bars and on the sheep, with a few fluttering around Maria. Sophia looked at her daughter proudly, but Frederick was shocked. This girl's talent in soul magic was so terrifying. Chapter 34 First Stop. Over 50 ragged refugees trudged along the road, their backs brimming with brittle, cracked farmland to their left and a river with a vast, exposed riverbed to their right. The scorching sun overhead refused to retreat behind the clouds. Behind them, a group of local farmers, armed with simple weapons, followed from a distance, fearing they would turn back. Near noon, the refugees finally reached the other side of the territory's boundary marker, and the farmers breathed a sigh of relief. But their work wasn't over yet. They had to return to monitor the passage of another group of refugees. Just then, an elderly priest approached. "Baron Wesson has built a rest area up ahead. Everyone, keep your energy up, and we'll be able to have lunch soon." Being a priest requires a loud, resonant voice, otherwise those sitting further away won't be able to hear your sermon. The refugees, hearing the priest's message, felt their leaden feet gain strength, and the pace quickened slightly. Among the refugees, the middle-aged man walking in front was tall, but as thin as the others. His hair and beard were tangled and covered in grass and dirt, and his face, especially his nose, was covered in dirt. On his back was an elderly woman, who was also carrying a small bundle. The priest who had brought the news surveyed the refugees and whispered to the priests accompanying them, "After lunch, let the elderly, weak, sick, disabled, and pregnant and their families take the carriages to the camp." The accompanying priest, now the backbone of the group and somewhat familiar with them, went over to the middle-aged man carrying the elderly woman and said, "Hosentpras, after lunch, take Madame Casper to the camp." Hosentpras simply nodded numbly. One day in early spring this year, he was about to rob Madame Casper's house. Just as he was about to break in, a loud noise came from the riverbank. Soon, the water in the village was up to his ankles. Hosentpras had forgotten what he was thinking. When he regained consciousness, he was carrying old Lady Casper on his back, clutching a millstone that produced music when it turned, a device he had hoped to steal, and struggling through knee-deep flood waters. They reached the hill outside the village and looked back to see the floodwaters as high as dining tables. Many houses had collapsed, and people and livestock were seen struggling in the floodwaters. It seemed as if a whole year's worth of water had flooded the land at once. The waters receded, leaving a barren landscape. Then came a period of hot, rainless weather from early spring to early summer, and the village wells were filled with silt from the floodwaters. When someone showed symptoms of the plague, the landowners rushed back to the castle, pulled up the drawbridge, and closed the gates. Those planning to rebuild their homes fled. They skirted a small grove of trees, and before them lay a fence area with sheds. The smell wafting through the air was like a stimulant, spurring many of the victims to rush forward with all their might. "Don't rush. Don't run. "There's plenty of food," the priest shouted. But the victims would listen. Starving people are capable of anything. The knights sent by the local lord were no match for the priests. Their long sticks tripped several people and struck several more on the head, forcing them to squat obediently. Herzenpraz, carrying old lady Casper on his back, walked slowly. Unlike the other residents with their families. The accompanying priest spoke to the knights, then told Herzenpraz and the other refugees with children to go first to receive food. A young monk came over and took Herzenpraz to a table and chairs, where he first set old lady Casper down and washed his hands before receiving his food. Frederick had set up several rest areas in front to provide food to the refugees, explain his policies, and identify those who were ill to prevent the plague from entering the camp. Today, Frederick, disguised as a young monk, came to investigate the situation. Some of the findings were as he had expected, but he was helpless. According to his standard, each person received a 500 milliliter bowl of soup and a half-pound multi-grain steamed bun. The Lord here mixed 1 pot of concentrated soup with 4 pots of water, then threw in the multi-grain steamed buns, turning them into a simmering paste. The exquisite and expensive slime plastic bowls and spoons had all been replaced with ordinary wooden bowls and spoons collected from the public. Even the plastic bags containing the concentrated soup and the multi-grain steamed buns had disappeared. The soup was stored in a ceramic pot, and the multi-grain steamed buns were placed in a wicker basket. Frederick had no recourse but to instruct the priests to ensure the soup was boiled for 5 minutes before serving. If the steamed buns were moldy, at least the moldy parts were removed. The wooden bowls and spoons were also scalded with boiling water. Herzenpraz washed his hands, then joined the queue to receive 2 wooden bowls and spoons. He then scooped up 2 bowls of simmered paste. Today's soup base was a simple bean broth, a bit watery but still hinted at spices. The melted multi-grain steamed buns, stirred, became a thick paste. He thought the aroma of this paste rivaled that of roasted pig. He carried the porridge to the table and saw the young monk talking to old lady Casper, but the old lady didn't respond, as still as a stone. "It's no use." Herzenpraz put down the bowl and pointed to his head. She saw her grandson swept away, then he whispered in Lady Casper's ear, "This is what Casper sent you." Lady Casper, a withered statue, transformed into a human being, picked up the spoon, and slowly ate. Herzenpraz shook his head and said to Frederick, "This is the only way now." He drank the porridge in 1 gulp and licked it clean. Frederick asked, "Is she your mother?" Herzenpraz offered a preconceived excuse, "She's my aunt." By then, each of the victims had received a bowl of porridge, and there was still some left in the pot, so the locals poured 2 buckets of well water into the pot and started to boil it. Some couldn't wait any longer and wanted to drink directly, but the orderly stood by the pot with sticks, and no one dared to move. Frederick didn't dare let them drink the raw water, fearing a cholera outbreak would be disastrous. Then the priest stepped in, still holding some credibility among the refugees, and urged everyone to wait. A knight approached the pot and threw a small fireball the size of a ping-pong ball into it. He stirred it with a spoon, and moments later, the water was boiling. Although the multi-grain steamed bun soup had a burnt smell, the refugees didn't care, just having something to eat and drink was a blessing. While it wasn't a filling meal for those who had been starving for so long, it was a decent, hot meal and soup. And it lifted many of the refugees' spirits. After eating, they were herded into another shed, covered only with linen and straw, where they would rest and sleep. The priest pointed to the fenced-off areas on either side and said they were latrines. They should go there to solve their problems. Those caught defecating or urinating anywhere would be hanged and beaten. Everyone sat numbly on the hay, wondering if they had heard anything at all. Herzenpraz, carrying old lady Casper on his back, boarded the carriage and left the makeshift camp with a young monk and several refugees with children. The passengers in the carriage had blank eyes. They boarded as the priests told them to, and no one asked where they were going. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35 I Believe in You Once. In a trance, Herzenpraz felt several seals stamped on the back of his right hand. Alchemists used various herbs and minerals to create a dye that was difficult to wash off once applied to the skin. It was originally used to dye cloth, but legend has it that someone had both buttocks amputated because their pants were discolored. Later, It was used for body painting in certain special circumstances. Many of the people managing the refugee camp were students from the University of Wessenland, and their common feature was the red hat they wore. "Can you read?" the students who stamped the seals asked Wessenland. Wessenland replied, "A little." The student pointed to the bottom row of letters and numbers on the back of his hand and said, "This is the number of the tent you and your aunt are staying in. When you go to take a shower and collect your belongings, someone will take them to your aunt's tent." Wessenland instinctively agreed. Then, a woman in a yellow hat came over, asked their names, and took old lady Casper away. "Let's go," the student in the red hat said, pointing to a large tent in the distance. "Go there first, shower, change clothes, and get your food before we go eat." With a promise of food, Wessenland obediently followed. He approached the tent and smelled hot water and what looked like medicinal herbs. The floor was made of wooden planks laid on rocks. As soon as he entered, a red-hatted student asked, "Do you have anything valuable on you?" Wessenland shook his head. "Then is it okay to change all your old clothes?" Wessenland shook his head again. Then he was ordered to strip completely. Wessenland hesitated, but then 4 burly men in boxer briefs pinned him down, stripped him completely, and shaved him clean, except for his eyebrows. Naked, Wessenland was pushed behind a curtain inside the tent. Inside, there were curtain compartments, and in the central passageway stood several vats of hot water, the source of the medicinal smell. "Wash yourself or have someone wash you," another bald, large man's voice brought him back to his senses. "I'll do it myself, I'll do it myself." Wessenland made his choice. He was then given a wooden bucket and a brush. He filled a bucket with liquid and went to a stall to wash himself. "Here's soap paste," the bald man said, carrying a wooden bucket. "Wash yourself again with this." Wessenland scooped up some of the sticky, sulfur-smelling soap paste and rubbed it all over his body, then scrubbed it again with a brush. Meanwhile, the bald man brought him a bucket of hot water with a linen cloth beside it. After washing and drying himself with a linen cloth, he followed the man's instructions and took the linen cloth behind another curtain. There were many shelves here, filled with clothing. Like the others, he received a pair of boxer shorts, a short-sleeved pullover, long trousers, and a pair of straw sandals. After putting them on, he stamped his hand with a stamp. When he emerged from the other side of the large tent, he was handed a large piece of linen, a plastic bag containing a bowl and spoon, and a seal, his blanket and dining utensils. A man in a yellow hat noticed him standing there in a daze and led him to his tent, telling him to wait until the bell rang before eating. Wessenland sat in the tent, stunned. On the other side, old lady Casper, also in a daze, clutched her small millstone. "What should I do next?" Wessenland finally had time to think about the future. Should I continue to seek out new forests and become a bandit? But being a bandit was tough, too. It was a constant state of fear. Sometimes you had to hunt, and then sell the furs you'd caught to merchants, who would think you'd stolen them and wouldn't accept them. The bell interrupted his thoughts. Wessenland, leading Lady Casper and the bag of utensils, headed for the dining area. There was no need to ask for directions now, they simply followed the others. They each had 2 bowls, one for soup and one for a multi-grain steamed bun. As he prepared to make soup, a cry of "Grandma" startled Wessenland. Frederick was in his tent discussing camp matters with old Franz when a group of 4 people arrived, 2 of whom he had met earlier, 2 wearing yellow hats. Old Mrs. Casper's grandson, Casper, had been swept away by the current. His friend Zapper, who had climbed the tree, pulled him up, but the tree soon collapsed, and the 2 of them drifted downstream for 3 days and nights. They were rescued by kind-hearted people downstream, but Casper fell ill. Zapper cared for him, and by the time Casper recovered and returned to the village, everyone had already fled. Following the refugees, the 2 men inquired and finally learned some news about old Mrs. Casper, who had taken a different route. They eventually arrived at the camp a few days early and was now working in the kitchen. "Are you the Wessenland?" old Franz exclaimed in surprise after hearing the whole story. The notorious thief, Wessenland, bound tightly with ropes, looked grim, but nodded. Frederick looked at him quietly, thought for a moment, and asked, "Why did you save old Mrs. Casper?" "I'll give you one chance to answer. You must tell the truth." "I can detect lies." He could tell the lies were false, but Wessenland believed that he could detect them, and that was enough. Wessenland said dejectedly, "I can't just run away by myself and watch her being washed away by the flood. I will have nightmares." Frederick nodded and said solemnly, It can be seen that you are a good person at heart. If Casper and Zoopetier are willing to forgive you, I will pretend to be ignorant of your previous actions. You can also come to live in Wesson County, but if there are any illegal or criminal acts, they will be punished according to the law. Hasenpras suddenly raised his head and looked at Baron Wesson, whom he had met once, in disbelief. Then he turned his head and looked at Casper expectantly. I'm willing to forgive him just once, Casper said. He saved my grandmother, Zapel also said. I'm willing to forgive him just once. Frederick nodded and asked Hasenpras, can you promise to live an honest life and not commit crimes again? Hasenpras immediately replied, I promise I can. Frederick said, I'll trust you just once. Let's go eat first. Hasenpras walked out of the tent feeling like he was stepping on clouds, floating and unreal. The next day, he donned a yellow hat and became a lumberjack. After work, he went to the food station, carrying a wooden sign denoting his hard work. The steaming pea soup in the pot was so fragrant that he could have 2 bowls. The steaming bread in the steamer was freshly made, warm and unadulterated, placed on a steamer mat made of fresh straw, with an extra hint of wheat aroma. He could have 2. For some reason, Hasenpras felt that this meal was the best he had ever eaten. However, he still felt a little regretful because he was not the one who chopped the most wood in the team today, otherwise he could have gotten a small piece of cheese. Chapter 36 Future Life. Because we are family, a loving family. After a few days of felling trees, Hasenpras and the others rode in a carriage, singing, as they left the camp in Loretown and headed for Wessenland. Initially, he was a little worried about being recognized by the people from Red Mud Village, which would cause trouble again. Now, he no longer had to worry. Surrounded by strangers from other places, no one recognized him. Now, everyone was a brother or sister of Wessenland. Hasenpras had decided to spend his life farming. He didn't know Frederick had ordered the relocation of people from all over, and he assumed Baron Wesson was taking care of him. It took them 4 days to reach the camp outside Hausen town in Wessenland. The next day, someone approached them to ask what they were good at. I'm a farmer. Hasenpras noticed the woman next to him gave the same answer. Curious, he turned and saw she was looking back. She was younger, sturdily built, and somewhat pretty. Hello, I'm Lihal. Hello, my name is Hasenpras. The 2 of them were acquainted. Red Hat looked at the 2 of them, both of whom were sturdy, and asked, there's a village to the south, on the edge of a mountain. Not far away is someone else's territory. Wild beasts often come over there. Would you like to go there? The 2 immediately agreed. 2 days later, Hasenpras and Lihal followed the others in a donkey cart, singing and heading to the place where their new life began. Lihal asked the driver, do you know how to raise a donkey? Hasenpras replied, I know a little. Did Red Hat say there are people who can teach me? I'll learn it if I learn. At that time, it was impossible for a village to be without livestock. They were needed for pulling carts, grinding mills, and carrying goods. However, the demand for livestock in Wesson County was so great that there were not enough draft horses on the market. So they bought a number of Ami donkeys, which are unique to the island of Rhodes in the Aegean Sea. Ami donkeys have great endurance. Legend has it that on Rhodes Island, 2 foreign men and 2 foreign women worked with an Ami donkey for 2 years without a day's rest. Hasenpras said with a smile, I can earn extra money raising donkeys for the village. When I save enough, I want to buy an Amar mule. That's great, Lihal said. Amar mules are easy to raise. Just give them a slap and they'll behave. When you have time, you can harness the cart and go to town to buy some goods to sell in the village. I heard there's black crystal eggs here made from chicken eggs. I'm thinking of collecting eggs from a nearby village and making them myself, then selling them in town. As they spoke, they passed a camp. A group of tents were surrounded by simple wooden walls. People were nearby cutting trees. At the edge of the woods, there were several animal-powered sawmills, which processed the wood and brought it back to the camp to build cabins. Hasenpras said with some concern, I don't know if I can draw lots earlier. I'm afraid it won't be my turn until winter, Lihal said with the same worry. Yes, Baron Wesson said that houses should be built for the elderly and children first. Those of us who live alone will have to wait. There was a young man in the back of the donkey cart who was originally chatting with the people around him. After hearing what they said, he said in surprise, don't you know? Only those with families have their own houses. We bachelors all live in collective houses. Lihal was stunned. He didn't expect there was such a rule. There are so many rules here, said the young man. It is said that if a family performs well, the young people can go to the city to learn the craft. Really? Plaz was surprised. That would cost a lot of money, right? The young man shook his head and replied, I heard the price is very cheap. If someone guarantees, I can borrow money from the Baron to learn, without interest. Plaz shook his head and said, I don't believe it. Isn't this asking the craftsman to die? The young man looked at the back of Plaz's bald head with disdain and said disdainfully, so you have to save money slowly to buy an Amu mule. I heard that Master Bryant, the best blacksmith in the territory, is planning to build a lakeside blacksmith shop on the shore of Lake Brombach, and he is cooperating with the scholars of Ahmed. In the future, apprentices who have studied for 2.5 years will be able to work there. The wages are much higher than those in ordinary blacksmith shops, and even many blacksmiths are willing to go there. Also, the Baron's ironworks is about to start construction. We can't just hire some stupid people to work there. No matter how many of them don't learn first, they will fall into the molten iron. In addition to syrup and steam bread, our Wesson County is most famous for bearings and steel. I heard that everything made of iron will be better and cheaper than other places in the future. Everyone will come to us to buy it, and the guys who go to the blacksmith shop will never have to worry about not being able to find a wife. Not only that, Master Benz in the carriage workshop is also recruiting people to make carriages. I heard that he is cooperating with Master Bryant, Scholars Ahmed and BASF. In the future, horse-drawn carriages can carry more goods, and carriages for people will not be bumpy at all. Let me tell you another thing. The University of Wessenberg has recently been working on a machine that can plow the land without horses. It is said that it can plow the land quickly and well, and can also grind flour. It does not need to be served every day like horses. In the future, every village will be able to buy several machines. Also, Wessenberg University will send scholars to teach us farming and livestock. That way, we'll be able to grow a lot more food. Hazenpraz, Lihal, and the others listened to the young man's chatter all the way from the donkey cart. Many farmers these days were relatively uninformed. Even Hazenpraz, who considered himself knowledgeable, was no different. What the young man said was completely new to them, and their eyes widened. After the young man finished, Lihal asked in confusion, How do you know so much? The others came to their senses. They had all fled here from other places, staying in the same place and for the same period. How could this man alone know all this and not them? The young man replied matter-of-factly, My name is Thomas. I was a student at Wessenberg University. I ran out of money and found a job, and now I am the village chief. The highest official the farmers had ever met was the village chief, and the coward in fear, unable to speak. Hazenpraz shuddered so hard that the donkey nearly pushed the cart into a ditch. Liher was a little bolder and asked Thomas a question that concerned him very much. Village chief. What is the name of our village? Thomas said, There are so many villages in our Wesson County now, and naming the villages is really worrying for everyone. Our village is okay. There is a particularly obvious place. The mountains there are all red mud, and there are many pine trees on the mountains, so it is called Red Mud Pine Village. Hazenpraz and Liher shuddered at the same time. Chapter 37 The machine can send you. When we hear an earnest call, the world should unite. In some places, people's lives hang by a thread. It's time to lend a helping hand. This is the greatest gift. As more and more refugees arrived at the camp, hired personnel from Wesson territory arrived in carriages, singing songs to strengthen the camp's management and construction. Frederick sat by the water pump on the riverbank, proudly listening to the various songs he had painstakingly translated into Rhineland. Compared to text and dry sermons, songs are easier to remember and more resonate with people. Frederick remembered seeing a question on a certain website in a previous life asking how to distinguish genuine soldiers from fake ones. One highly rated answer asked him to sing the 3 disciplines and 8 points of attention immediately, and he knew he was the real one. He also remembered a scene in the film Underground Communication Station where, during the training of fake 8th Route Army soldiers, the captured puppet soldiers also sang the 3 disciplines and 8 points of attention when recalling them. Therefore, in terms of spiritual civilization, he devoted considerable energy to music, plagiarizing and adapting so many songs that his music teacher went on strike due to his differing musical philosophies. However, Frederick faced a problem. The development of music paralleled the development of musical instruments. The instruments he currently had couldn't achieve the effect he desired, and he didn't understand the history of musical instruments, so he had to make do. Frederick, a pleasant but timid voice brought Frederick back from his thoughts. He turned to see Maria standing nearby, her head bowed, her hands clutching the hem of her skirt. "Maria, oh, what's wrong with you?" Frederick noticed something was off about the little girl. Maria lowered her head and asked, "Am I a bad girl? I've pissed you off, so you won't play with me anymore." Frederick blinked, a moment before understanding what she meant. He had initially lived in Maria's castle, but when the camp was built, he moved in to facilitate on-site work, even with a maid Taro and the coachman who came with him. While living in the castle, he had time to play checkers with Maria, but with the camp established and the arrival of refugees, that time was gone. "No," Frederick said with a bright smile. "I've been very busy lately. I'll come play with you later, okay?" Maria, visibly relieved, smiled. Seeing Philip and an old man standing in the distance, followed by several experts, Frederick said to the girl, "There are a lot of bugs here. You should hurry back to the castle. I'll be back for dinner tonight." "Really?" Maria's smile widened. "Don't lie." Only after Frederick's repeated assurances did the girl leave, led back to the castle by a maid. Then, Frederick was stopped by someone. Philip looked at the man as if he were a pig trying to dig up his cabbage seedlings. The old man's gaze was like a sharp knife, as if he wanted to pierce someone like a colander. Frederick put on a curt expression, trying to get away with it. A puff of steam rose, breaking the brief standoff. The old man looked at the water pump nearby, frowning and asking, "What's this?" Before them was an iron box the size of a washing machine. Ceramic pipes connected to the top and bottom led to the river and the camp, respectively. A bellows-like handle at one end moved it back and forth. A reciprocating pump operating on the same principle. The handle operated a strange machine. A metal rod, 3 fingers thick, connected to it by a magical circuit, rhythmically expanded and contracted, driving an iron rod that pulled the reciprocating pump. Next to the machine stood a stand, on which sat a wooden barrel with an oblique cut, through which a stick passed. A small finger-thick pipe, attached to the top of the reciprocating pump, filled the barrel with water. When the water reached a certain level, it would pour itself onto the reciprocating rod, cooling it. "Your Excellency, Grand Duke of Mainz, this is a water pump," Frederick said in a charming voice. "The river level is much lower now, so this is the only way to pump water over the dike." Frederick immediately recognized the old man's identity through the guards, Philip's feudal lord, Dalberg von Mainz. Dalberg seemed intrigued by the machine. After examining it, he asked Frederick, "Who made this?" Frederick replied, "Scholars from the University of Wessenland did it. A reciprocating pump isn't exactly high-tech, it's a modified bellows from an ironworks, with slime glue used to strengthen the seal." The reciprocating machine was a technology demonstration machine that Amit had originally built by taking Frederick's advice and having his students dismantle a golem puppet they had brought with them, using the magic muscles within. 10 machines were constructed using the magic muscles from the golem's limbs and waist. 5 of them were horizontal, while 5 were vertical. It was later discovered that the vertical type was quite convenient for ironworks, provided heat dissipation was addressed. Dalberg nodded and said, "It looks very useful." "Of course," Frederick said immediately, "it's very powerful, equivalent to 10 horses, and can replace the water wheel to push the mill in the mill. As long as the magic crystal has magic power, it can work all day long. It only needs water to cool it and occasionally replace worn parts." We have also done comparative experiments. The price of magic crystals consumed to grind 1 ton of wheat is cheaper than horse feed, and it's not expensive, only about 100 florins. Dalberg thought it was good at first, but shook his head when he heard the price. "It's too expensive," he said. "That price could buy 50 sturdy draft horses." Frederick shrugged and said, "There's no way we can arrange for 50 horses to work together here." Dalberg frowned and shook his head, continuing, "Too expensive." Frederick said, "Oh," and stopped talking about a machine. Instead, he said, "I apologize for the recent impact on the Duchy of Mainz caused by my actions. I beg the Grand Duke to forgive me. The machine cost less than 10 florins, a brand new one costing only about 10 gold florins." He set a high price to avoid giving the impression that the magic-powered machine was cheap, otherwise how would he sell it in the future? Currently, the only potential customers for the magic-powered machine were wealthy landowners, and there was no competition. Unlike malt sugar, where wealthy people have no shortage of honey, Frederick could only target a vast market of ordinary people with a relatively low price. So Frederick naturally sold it at the highest price he could. No one wanted too much money. Climbing the tech tree was In a sense, synonymous with spending money like water, he wasn't in a rush to sell, however. Heat dissipation issues were hindering the machine's use. Dalberg had already been tempted. A wealthy mine owner, he'd also faced the problem of pumping water, and this machine was perfectly suited for the confined spaces of the mine tunnels. 100 florins wasn't much for him. His unicorn-bred warhorse could buy 10 of these machines, and a suit of armor could buy 5. But his money wasn't impeccable, so he had bargained whenever possible. Unexpectedly, Frederick refused. 100 florins is 100, Dalberg said generously. I know you're short on cash. I'll take your offer. I'll take 3. King William had exploited the Wesson family for the victims of the disaster. While the long-term benefits outweighed the risks, the short-term consequences were significant for Frederick. Everyone in the luxury goods world knew that the Wesson family had nearly sold out of their gold items, and rumors were circulating that they were preparing to sell off their silver tableware. Seeing how neatly Frederick had handled the matter, Dalberg had an idea. He decided to take the opportunity to offer his assistance. However, Frederick was more forthright and said earnestly, I can give the Grand Duke 5, but I'd like to ask a favor. It's not a big deal. Just take the lead in expanding the scope of the patent law from textile patterns, cooking, and winemaking to other areas. Dalberg's gaze towards Frederick suddenly grew sharper. Chapter 38, Why did you come here in the first place? Why are we here this time? Well, Frederick made Maria sad, and we're here to teach him a lesson. Have you taught him a lesson? The air in the carriage suddenly grew quiet. Dalberg looked out the window quietly, seeing cargo ships concentrated in the middle of the main river, cautiously moving upstream. What do you think of Wesson? He asked. Philip replied in a deep voice, He's terrifying. At first I thought there was someone behind him who actually controlled everything, but the people I assist in the camp have discovered that he always handles every problem himself, and handles it almost perfectly. He just seemed to have lost 500 florins, but a machine like that would cost no less than 50 florins. With the protection of the patent law, he can make it back immediately, and even more. His decisiveness surpasses many people. Dalberg hummed softly and continued to look out a window. The year after next, he suddenly said, in the late autumn of 1026, to celebrate my 80th birthday, organize a large hunting trip. 2 years is enough time to see clearly. Philip immediately understood what the Grand Duke of Mainz meant. Everyone is licking their wounds now, and a large-scale, quasi-military hunt is the most direct way to declare their own strength restored. If the Wesson County can demonstrate sufficient strength at that time, the Duchy of Mainz will take the initiative to extend an olive branch. William is old, Dalberg whispered. When you get old, you get impatient. Rudolph is a good boy. Although he has a soft temper due to growing up in the palace, at least he doesn't offend us. If you want him to broaden his horizons and establish his authority, that's fine, but there's no need to drag us into it. Now it's good. The lowlands have been lost, and Rudolph scared the slimes into being braver than him. Philip, you have to travel frequently next year. There's no need to do much at this time. Just maintain friendships. Take the young people with you. Let them travel and see more. Philip immediately accepted the order. Dalberg sighed and said, if that useless Rudolph doesn't change before William dies, the Confederation of the Rhine will exist in name only, and we Germans will be without our own independent state. Philip remained silent. As a senior court official, he understood the Grand Duke's intentions well. The Grand Duke of Mainz dedicated his life to establishing a Germanic state. However, in this era, the feudal system made people more defined by locality and region. Nation was only used by outsiders to designate people from a certain region who shared a common or similar language and customs, and was rarely used internally. Dalberg had only the beginnings of nationalism in his mind, and he couldn't figure out how to bring the fragmented Germanic people to consensus. Huh? Dalberg suddenly noticed something. Your carriage isn't bumpy at all, and it's quite fast, Philip quickly replied. This was originally Frederick's carriage. He knew Sophia couldn't stand the jolting ride, so he gave it to us. Dalberg pondered, how did he make it so comfortable? As the sun set, Frederick arrived at the castle in Lower. He witnessed a truly remarkable sight. Baron Ertl stood helplessly beside the carriage, which lay beneath a thick carpet. The Grand Duke of Mainz crouched beneath it, examining the bearings on the axle. Come here, Dalberg beckoned Frederick from beneath the carriage. Tell me what's that on the axle? Frederick, of course, didn't crawl under the carriage with him. Instead, he opened the trunk and pulled out a wooden box containing 2 spare bearings wrapped in oilcloth. Dalberg emerged from beneath the carriage, glared at Philip, and then began to examine the greasy bearings. Philippe looked innocent. He was only concerned with riding, not repairing. How could he possibly know there were spare parts? This is a bearing, Frederick said. The beads inside act like wheels, reducing friction and saving the horse the effort. Dalberg grasped the inner ring of the bearing with one hand and fiddled with the outer ring with the other. A very clever design, the Grand Duke of Mainz exclaimed. The principle is so simple, why didn't anyone think of it before? Frederick replied, it existed before, but due to processing problems, only wooden beads could be made. They couldn't be used in carriages because they would be crushed. They were only installed on door hinges to make opening and closing doors easier, so they weren't widely used. Dalberg nodded, playing with a bearing in his hand. He walked to the side of the carriage, pointed at the black glue on the wheel, and asked, what is this black glue? Frederick then pulled out a large, flat wooden box from the compartment under the carriage and opened the oilcloth bag inside. Inside were two solid tires made of black slime glue. This is the tire of the wheel, he said. This material is elastic and wear-resistant, just like putting shoes on the wheel, but the sizes of the wheels are different, and the tires of ordinary cars need to be specially made, which is very inconvenient. Now the carriages in Wesson County are being modified, and the axles and wheels are unified, so it will be convenient to replace parts in the future. Then he pointed to the place where the axle and the body were connected and said, the wooden boards in this place are also sandwiched with this kind of glue, so you won't feel the bumps when you sit in the car. Dalberg looked at the carriage again and said, give me one too. Frederick thought for a while and said, I only sell the frame. I don't have the money to make decorations. An ordinary four-wheeled carriage is only 10 florins, but the carriages of these nobles are extremely luxurious, and there is no upper limit on the price. It is said that the king's carriage costs 2,000 florins, which is considered the top luxury car among carriages. Dalberg realized this and said, no problem, but I have one request. We need to minimize the bumps. We old men can't stand that. Okay, Frederick agreed. But not until next year. Our master car builder is busy building a new factory. Dalberg had just agreed when a burst of laughter rang out. Maria, having heard that Frederick had arrived and waited in the toy room for a long time, came out to look for him. You're here, Maria said with a smile. Come and play chess with me. With that, the little girl took Frederick's sleeve and led them into the castle. Frederick ignored the two men with dark, frightening faces and followed Maria into the castle, returning to his own room halfway to change. He had been running around the camp all day and was sweating profusely. Taro had already returned, soaking a cotton towel in warm water and wiping his sweat off his body and face before helping him into clean clothes. Dalberg arrived at the toy room early, a kind smile on his face. As Maria introduced the various toys Frederick had given her, including checkers, wooden dragonflies, and flying chess, Maria, with a pout, handed Dalberg a Rubik's Cube made of mammoth tusk and 6 colored gemstones, saying dejectedly, Godfather, I can't put this cube back together. Dalberg took the cube, examined it, inquired about the rules, and then tried to put the scrambled cube back together. When Frederick emerged, the Grand Duke of Mainz hurled a snarl at him. Are you trying to trick Maria with a broken toy? Frederick's mouth twitched, and he reached out for magic. As he recovered, he said, How dare I? Many of these toys were originally intended for your great-grandson. I didn't expect you to go to the hot springs, so I gave them all to Maria. This Rubik's Cube had been handcrafted piece by piece by the skilled artisans who had once worked under Almeida's jewelry makers. Combined with the Wesson family's inventory of mammoth tusks and the 6 inexpensive gemstones, it could already be sold as a luxury item among the aristocracy, easily enough to buy a few ordinary carriages. As he spoke, he restored the Rubik's Cube, showed it to Maria and Dalberg, and then suddenly turned his back to twisting it. Dalberg glared at Frederick and softly said to Maria, Would you mind giving me this toy? Maria thought for a moment, then pointed to the dagger at his waist and said, Okay, but I'll have to trade it for this. The dagger's scabbard was made of gold, inlaid not with gemstones but with high-quality magic crystals. The dagger itself was a magical weapon, easily fetching a few dozen florins. Dalberg whispered softly, Oh, this dagger is too dangerous. Can you trade it for something else? Maria began to act coquettishly. Maria received the dagger. Maria gave it to Frederick. Frederick's reputation with Dalberg became he has no problem beating him up. Chapter 39 To cure the disease. Frederick, do you want to build a glass workshop? Frederick paused, cutting a rosemary roast chicken and eyeing the Grand Duke of Mainz warily. Dalberg said kindly, "Don't look at me like that. I'm Maria's godfather, and you're her good friend. You're my junior, and it's only right for elders to look after their juniors," Frederick replied bluntly. No money. Dalberg was speechless. Frederick was truly broke. The gold beads originally reserved for the family's primary reserve had been almost used up on digging the canal, and the gold used for the secondary reserve, for Wessenberg University, refugee camps, and new factories, was also nearly sold out. The commercial tax from Wessenberg was used to pay for government officials, the Wessenberg Defense Forces, and employees. The year-end bonuses were still paid out of the gold coins Armand had brought. After saving some for emergencies, there wasn't much left. While the glassware business was profitable, the initial investment was substantial, and this unplanned money couldn't be taken out. Dalberg thought for a moment, then said, "It's okay if you don't have money. I can lend it to you, interest-free, and you can pay it back when you make money." Something must be wrong. Frederick took his juice slowly, took a sip, and after setting the glass down, he remained silent, just staring at him. Seeing the boy's wariness, Dalberg patiently explained, "I want to build a glass workshop, and Philip is the director. I have a distant nephew named George, who has loved glassmaking since he was a child, but George and Philip are having some issues, and he wants to make his own way. I'm thinking of sending him to your place." Frederick picked up his knife and fork, cut a piece of chicken, and began to eat, pondering the underlying situation. Dalberg's word should be taken with a grain of salt. The so-called distant nephew mentioned by the nobles was generally an illegitimate child. It was likely that the conflict with Philip was a lie, and the illegitimate child was being sent to another place. Otherwise, there was no explanation for the gift of both money and the person. Judging from the name, the illegitimate child's mother was not from the local area. Frederick had considered getting involved in the glass industry, but it wasn't a high priority. The nearby city of Nuremberg was a historic glass-producing region, but it couldn't compare to them in terms of worker skill, raw materials, or sales channels. Now with the slime glue industry, the glass industry's priority was even lower. Just as Frederick was about to refuse, Sophia suddenly started coughing violently. Her entire body bent so much that her head seemed to be touching the ground, her hands tightly pressed against her cramped abdomen, and she was still a little breathless. Philip immediately pulled a medicine bottle from his wife's pocket, helped her up, and fed her the potion. Maria jumped off the chair and came behind her mother, patting her back with a sad face. Sophia stopped coughing soon after drinking the potion and sat in the chair, gasping for breath. Dalberg frowned and asked, "Isn't the medicine working?" Philip said with a look of worry, "A bottle of medicine used to last 2 days, but now it only lasts half a day." Dalberg sighed and said, "Take her to rest." Frederick frowned. He had initially thought Sophia had tuberculosis, as the symptoms were similar, but it wasn't contagious. And there was only one other patient in the castle. However, he was unfamiliar with the medical techniques of this world and couldn't help much. Philip and Maria helped Sophia away, leaving Frederick and Dalberg alone at the table. "Alice," Dalberg sighed, "how could such a good baron suffer from this kind of poverty disease?" Seeing Frederick's puzzled look, he explained, "Sophia's family's territory is right next to it. She is an only daughter. After she married Philip, the territories of the two families were merged. Her family has a copper mine. She has never had to worry about food and drink since she was a child." "Who knew that she would suffer from this lung disease that only poor people would have?" Frederick asked. "Is there no cure for this disease?" Dalberg just shook his head slightly, picked up the wine glass and drank the cider in it. Frederick pondered for a moment, then looked up and said to the Grand Duke of Mainz, "I've agreed to the glass workshop, but I have one request." Dalberg asked, "What is it?" Frederick replied, "I need a craftsman who can grind lenses, like those for telescopes." Dalberg shook his head and said, "I don't have such a craftsman. Grinding lenses like olive pits requires very high skills. You can look for one in Sardinia. Telescopes are imported from there." Frederick could only say, "Thank you for the information, sir." He had just thought of the microscope, which might be a way to discover the cause of Sophia's illness. As for glass production, under the current conditions, he only knew how to remove bubbles by adding arsenic and stirring. Flowed glass was out of the question. The protective atmosphere required for that process was beyond his ability. At best, he could use the dough rolling method to produce unevenly thick or wavy flat glass. Instead, he could explore the use of molds to press out glassware like dishes. The overall profit margins in the mid-range market were comparable to those in the high-end market. He could ask Katie to help find a lens grinder. If he could find one, he could also consider glasses, in addition to microscopes and telescopes. Frederick felt a bit disappointed. Currently, his light magic was focused on healing, illumination, and illusions. It would be much more powerful if he could develop magic that involved light refraction. Psyche hadn't explained how light stimulated cell growth. After dinner in the dining room, the two of them retired to their rooms. Their staff would handle the glass workshop. In his room, Frederick wrote a letter to Katie, asking her to find a craftsman skilled in lens grinding. After finishing the letter, he fell into deep thought at his desk. The gap between a microscope and a telescope was only a thin line. Their appearance was inevitable. Making a fortune from this wasn't feasible. Sophia's condition was grim. Her lung disease could become incurable if it worsened. If he worked on the microscope himself, he might not have enough time. Ultimately, to develop a microscope quickly and increase the possibility of treating Sophia, he decided not to pursue a monopoly. After the young master, whom Taro had observed, fell into a daze, he quietly prepared parchment and ink for him, and poured a cup of tea and placed it beside him. He could leave work early for the day. Frederick began diligently recalling his junior high school physics lessons on optics, preparing to summarize and refine his existing knowledge. He also sought to use mathematical tools to guide his research on lenses and develop the principles of the microscope. His experience with scholars at the University of Wessenland suggested that scholars in this world possessed a strong desire to explore the unknown, which should be enough to encourage their devotion to the microscope. Chapter 40. Being a doctor also requires learning mathematics. Master, have you been feeling down lately? Old Franz noticed something was amiss with Frederick since he'd returned from his overnight stay at the castle. Lately, Frederick had been worried and distracted from the camp, spending his days writing and drawing in his tent. He simply shook his head and said nothing when he heard old Franz's question. Sophia's condition wasn't looking promising. A letter to the experts at the University of Wessenland had been sent, but they were unsuccessful. Only Friedrich had prescribed a rotation of cough syrups to reduce her resistance. Nothing, Frederick said. What's the matter? He trusted the old knight. Now that the camp was on track, there were precedents for many things, so he didn't have to make so many decisions. Old Franz said, "A doctor wants to see you." The Wesson family didn't have a family physician. The original doctor had resigned after Frederick's mother's death. So now that a doctor had come calling, old Franz immediately informed Frederick. Doctor, Frederick paused. What's the matter? Old Franz, his face drooping, said to his master, Dr. Frank is worried about an outbreak of plague in the camp, so he volunteered to help. I saw he was so kind, so I came to report to you. I've asked around, and Dr. Frank has graduation badges from 3 medical schools. He sounds quite skilled, and you can handle my chronic ailments better than my family doctor did before. He also has a daughter, Miss Florence, a nurse who also has a graduation badge from a medical school. Frederick understood immediately. Old Franz was not young anymore, and would soon need a doctor. Without a good doctor in Wesson County, he would be in a difficult situation. Let them in, Frederick said. Old Franz quickly led a middle-aged man in his 40s and a woman in her 20s into the tent. Frederick had Taro bring chairs for the two to sit down. He examined the medical school graduation badges worn by the father and daughter, figuring their medical skills were no problem. He asked, "Do you know algebra and geometry?" Frank was looking for a job here. He'd heard that Baron Wesson was still a child, so he'd mentally prepared for the interview. His experience as a graduate of 3 medical schools was enough to impress many. But despite his preparation, Frederick hadn't expected him to start by asking if he knew math. He asked cautiously, "Baron, may I ask why a doctor requires knowledge of algebra and geometry?" Frederick pulled a bundle of parchment tied with string from a nearby file box and handed it to Frank, saying, "I don't want a doctor who serves only me, but a marshal among doctors. Such a doctor doesn't need to be a master of medical skills. He needs to find ways to cure illnesses and save lives from numbers. For example, our camp had only 2,000 to 3,000 people in the early days. At that time, several pharmacists and scholars from the University of Wessenland, along with dozens of students in pharmacy and other majors, divided into 2 groups, each carrying out different tasks. The first group collected physical statistics for everyone. After analyzing these statistics, they compiled a statistical table of the factors that caused various diseases. Based on this data, they drew a primary and secondary chart and identified the diseases most in need of treatment from the numerous diseases. Then they carefully sorted out these diseases and analyzed their causes. Using cause and effect diagrams, they gradually dissected them, identifying the causes of the major diseases. Then, based on the current statistics, they identified numerous causes of disease and used a key cause identification table to identify each one, ultimately determining the primary cause. After identifying the primary cause, they compiled a table of cause-based countermeasures and measures, setting corresponding countermeasures and control targets. Using this as a guide, they focused their limited resources on treating patients and preventing disease within the camp. The second group conducted independent statistics. They regularly compiled data on the types of diseases, the number of patients, and the number of recoveries within the camp. They analyzed and compared data using tables and graphs to monitor real-time changes in various diseases and provide a basis for decision-making. Frederick finished his speech, then took a sip from his teacup to moisten his throat. He knew nothing about medicine. Pharmacy scholars and students understood pharmaceuticals, but they only knew how to diagnose simple illnesses and were not as specialized as doctors. So, when faced with numerous illnesses, Frederick could only tackle the most serious ones first. He didn't have many tools available to effectively analyze and decide on the disease problem at the moment, so he simply had the first group use quality control group work to identify the disease to be treated first and apply the key cause analysis to that problem. Meanwhile, the second group used statistics to visualize information and statistics, using intuitive data to inform decision-making. This was a significant contribution of the lantern goddess of his hometown. The current three-step process of disposing of old clothes, shaving, and bathing after arriving at the camp originated from this process, aimed at reducing the spread of various blood-sucking and skin parasites. Frederick had seen a refugee who required special treatment. Skin parasites had laid eggs on 2 palm-sized areas on his back. The eggs had already hatched, and the only way to remove them was to pour melted beeswax over them and then physically remove the larvae, similar to how you remove blackheads. Intestinal parasites were particularly prevalent. Fortunately, Friedrich's anthelmintic capsules were effective against worms other than roundworms, so the students who knew necromancy had a difficult time having to go to the septic tank daily to deworm, otherwise the land would be lost. Frank and Florence, father and daughter, quietly studied the data and charts on the parchment, deeply moved. Finally, Frank said solemnly, "Baron Wesson, I have a favor to ask." Frederick nodded and said, "Go ahead." Frank removed the badges from his lapel, a hint of enthusiasm on his face as he excitedly declared, "Please tell me, sir, which scholar invented this method? I want to be his student." He was intrigued by the method used in these documents to determine the causes of illnesses. Many diseases today lack a universally accepted explanation for how they develop. If he could pinpoint the causes of these illnesses using this method, his name would naturally appear most frequently on medical students' exams. Before Frederick could respond, old Franz, standing nearby, said, "Who else could it be? Our Baron's teacher. However, that master traveled elsewhere several years ago, and I don't know where he is now. If you want to learn, you can learn from our master." He had been present when Frederick had assigned the task and had explained the wandering scholar's excuse. If they could keep this doctor, everyone would win. Frederick shrugged and said, "Actually, this method isn't primarily used in medicine. I just don't have any other methods. It can also be used in agriculture and handicrafts. If you want to learn, you can first take a position here, and then study and discuss with students from Wiesenberg University." Frank immediately agreed. Frederick asked Taro to arrange accommodations for the father and daughter, and then said to old Franz, "Next, let him start managing the camp. I'll go back to the territory the day after tomorrow to see how the new village is going." Old Franz quickly said, "No problem. We all have experience now." Chapter 41 Progress is going well. People tend to get into trouble when they have free time, so many jobs in the camp paid for food. Fearing hunger, those with energy would don yellow hats and do some work to earn a living. These jobs ranged from chopping wood to cleaning the camp, from swatting flies to catching rats, and even helping Philip with farm work. However, there were also bad actors among the refugees. Recently, some refugees had saved a few steamed buns through their labor, and then thieves appeared. This presented a problem. Philip was responsible for the laws of the camp, but he had never taken the initiative to speak out on the matter. Managing the refugees was a thorny issue. After Frederick took the initiative to negotiate, Philip temporarily appointed a judge sent by Frederick as a full-time judge for the refugee camp, with jurisdiction limited to the camp itself. These crimes had severely tarnished people's impression of Wessenland, and Frederick had already issued an order for severe punishment. With a generous reward, the thieves were quickly apprehended and, as required by law, publicly displayed in the stocks for 10 days before being expelled. Frederick was preparing to return to his territory, and before leaving, he issued a new directive. All prisoners were to be hung above the latrines, upside down, and low. Conditions at the 3 transit camps on the way back to Wessenland were much better. Newcomers to the Wessenland family stayed there for only half a day, and no incidents occurred. However, the constant flow of personnel and supplies within the camps posed a significant challenge to the younger generation managing them. After Frederick returned to Hausen, Administrator Frick briefed him on the progress. As of yesterday, 15,532 people had arrived in Wessenland, Frick said, reading the report. They have been relocated to 59 new villages. We've gained enough experience to expedite delivery. We have ample food reserves. Madame Sophie's caravan recently arrived with 10 ships of rice from the southern continent. She said it was for you. They'll be bringing wheat and beans soon, at market prices. Frederick was startled when he heard Madame Sophie. This pagan merchant had returned from the east. Is she here? Frederick asked immediately. No, Frick shook his head. Her steward said that Madame Sophie has to take care of household chores, and she will probably come here with the goods you want in late autumn or early winter. The steward also said that if the master wants a red-horned mule, just let him know. One of their buyers died in an accident recently, and the goods are going to be in jeopardy. Frederick thought about it. The red-horned mule is a hybrid of a unicorn and a donkey. Compared with the Armenian mule, its endurance is worse, but it is faster and not picky about food. In addition to being used by civilians to carry goods and pull carts, cavalry also likes to use it to carry logistical supplies because it can keep up with the speed of horses. Yes, Frederick said. We'll need it to transport oil when we dig the canal. Once the canal is open, we can build a fleet dedicated to transporting goods and people. He then asked, how are the winter clothing preparations going? Frick reviewed the report and replied, we currently have enough cloth and cotton to produce 65,000 sets of winter clothing. Mr. BASF has invented new slime rubber shoes, which are very cheap. We've started raising crystal slime in the fallow fields. Crystal slime takes 3 months to grow, so we should be able to make winter shoes before winter arrives. Frederick frowned. Winter clothing was the biggest expense this time. All the clothing for over 60,000 people would cost a gold ball the size of a volleyball. For the past 2 years, the new village has been all investment, no output. With so many people relying on Frederick for support, the expenses, from pots and pans to food, were no less than the winter clothing. All the gold cups, bowls, plates, knives and forks used in grand banquets were gone. Golden vases and other items were taken south in exchange for food. Almost the only gold left in the castle was the people's hair. Fortunately, the grain can be purchased in batches, and the funds can still be turned over. If it were anyone else, King William's scheme would truly have destroyed this territory. What do they think of taxes? Frederick asked. Is a 50% tax for 10 years okay? How could it be a problem? Frick sighed. Taxes are already at this level elsewhere. We only collect less because the land is underdeveloped and the grain production is low. Frederick nodded. That was fine. What about the houses? He continued. Will we make it in time? There's a problem. Frick's face showed a hint of difficulty. We're short on nails right now. The blacksmith shop has adjusted its staff and is rushing to make them, but we're still short of some. Bryant Setti and Professor Al might have researched a new machine that hammers nails much faster, so it can barely keep up. Frederick was also somewhat helpless. If that doesn't work, just buy some back. Although the nails were small, hammering them one by hand was still very troublesome. Some families kept a set of nail-making tools at home, hammering them by the fireplace during the winter, earning a considerable income over the winter. In Frederick's home world, nails didn't become cheap until the Industrial Revolution, when smelting, metalworking, and machine production reached a certain level and machine production began. He'd heard the term foreign nails a lot in his childhood. How is the village being managed now? He asked again. Frick grew serious and said, Baron, the population and number of villages in our territory have increased dramatically, and the existing town hall is no longer sufficient. I suggest that all the existing towns be upgraded to cities, with each town's boundaries redefined. Frederick thought about it, and, convinced it was the right move, He said, "Not a problem, I agree. Come up with a plan for me. Also, you should consider the possibility of building a city along the canal." Frick agreed immediately. With a rising tide, he became the administrator of Wessenland, holding the position of mayor of Wessenberg in a higher rank than the other mayors. Now that other towns have been upgraded to cities, his power has naturally increased. Frederick saw through his little thoughts and said nothing. Adjusting administrative districts is inevitable. At the same time, with a larger population, there are more things to do, and promotion is a natural thing. It's not surprising that people have ambitions, as long as everyone is moving in the same direction. "Now we are preparing for autumn sowing," Frederick said. "We can't relax on this matter," Frick replied. "This year, the autumn sowing of several villages will be guided by professors from Wessenberg University. I have ordered the villages to cooperate." Frederick nodded. He knew about this and said, "Okay, I'll go and see tomorrow to see how the professors are farming." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 42 Plant Magic. Is that okay? Why not? This mill was just used to grind bones. Wouldn't it be dirty to grind flour without washing the bones? No problem. The flour is for the town lords anyway. Being a miller was a prestigious position in the domain, well paid and high-ranking. The farmers had to greet them as sir. So, when the miller in Chestnut Village was dismissed on the spot by the young master and appointed a collector of materials for the composting site, his wife chased him around the village with a pitchfork. Inside the mill, Frederick scooped a spoonful of bone meal with a wooden spoon and studied it for a long time. Then he went outside to the open-air stove. There were 3 stoves, each with a large pot large enough for Frederick to stew. The villagers were placing the collected broken bones, along with some clam and snail shells, into the pot on the left, adding a large amount of wood ash and water to cook the bones. In the pot in the middle, the bones had been boiling for a while. Someone was skimming off the fat and adding water to prevent it from drying out. The stove's flue had been converted into a drying bed, similar to a kang, a traditional fire heating platform, where the fat-free bones were dried. Once thoroughly dry, they were collected and sent to the mill for grinding. Because the finer the bone meal, the more fertile it is. After the first grinding, the bone meal was sieved on a hydraulic sieve, and the coarser bones were ground a second time. Frederick watched for a moment and decided that grinding bone meal with a stone mill wasn't very convenient. He thought he'd get a ball mill going later. Lining the wooden barrels with iron sheets would extend their lifespan. Large pebbles would work, instead of steel balls. He turned to the village chief beside him and asked, "Are there enough bones?" The chief hunched over, replying, "Not enough now, but it's hard to say about the future. We're planning to buy more from other territories," Frederick hummed softly. Currently, farmers prioritize nitrogen fertilizers like compost and green manure. They have some knowledge of wood ash and potassium fertilizers, but they don't prioritize them enough. As for phosphorus fertilizers, they simply mix bones into the compost. Inspired by Frederick, Professor Matthias of the University of Wessenberg has begun to prioritize compound fertilizers, increasing the importance of phosphate fertilizers. The problem is that per capita meat consumption is currently too low, leaving few bones to make bone meal. Blood meal faces a similar problem. In a pot to the right of the stove, collected livestock blood is boiling. Once dispersed, quicklime is added at a ratio of 20 kilograms to 100 kilograms of blood, stirring rapidly. When it turns dark brown, it is sun-dried or oven-dried before being ground into powder. Before planting wheat, moistening wheat seeds and then mixing them with 4% blood meal by weight can increase yields by 10% or even 20%. Bones can be collected elsewhere, but the raw materials for blood meal are more difficult to source. Today, word spread that Baron Wesson is buying large quantities of blood. Perhaps tomorrow, a queen hero or the like will come to battle of us, requiring a large supply of acid slime. This is not to mention the fact that blood sausage is a common village food and blood meal doesn't keep well for long periods of time. To solve the raw material problem, we must vigorously develop the livestock industry. For now, forget about chemical fertilizers. At most, we can get some potassium nitrate. Urea and gypsum are also out of the question. These fertilizers are acidic, and this oil here is primarily acidic. Adding them to dumplings is a good way to dip them. Frederick arrived at the edge of the field, preparing for autumn sowing. The farmer's entire family, young and old, was mixing compost, bone meal, wood ash, and jinkala, then spreading it evenly over the ground. Jinkala was the first product from his hometown that Frederick had replicated since his arrival in this world. It's actually zeolite. Jinkala's no loss, no evaporation claim is true. Due to its unique structure, zeolite absorbs nutrients from the soil like a sponge, releasing them when the outside soil is depleted, thus reducing fertilizer nutrient loss. These fields had just been planted with peas and other beans. After harvesting, the bean vines were turned over and watered thoroughly to allow them to rot. Now, after applying base fertilizer and deep plowing, it was time to sow. Frederick looked around for a moment before finding Professor Matthias, the imperial planter, and several of his students in a threshing ground at the edge of the field. Compared to the fertilization they'd just been doing, this was truly groundbreaking. Small trenches had been dug into the compacted ground, and a group of students, carrying buckets, were pouring a deep red, mud-like substance into the trenches. Frederick approached Matthias and asked curiously, "What kind of magic circle is this?" Matthias replied, "It stimulates seeds, causing plants to produce more fruit." Frederick's eyes lit up, and he hurriedly asked, "Does it work on all plants?" "Of course," Matthias said, a smug look on his face. "Many of the plants I manipulate use fruit as weapons. This magic is my specialty." Frederick's eyes sparkled, and he thought he'd found a treasure. At this moment, a student said, "Teacher, you're focusing on fruit magic because your entanglement spells are so poor." Matthias's eyes widened. He extended his right hand, a black plant seed from nowhere tucked between his fingers. He said coldly, "Would you like to try my lousy entanglement spell?" The student shrank back and ran away. Matthias saw Frederick staring intently at the seed in his hand. He smiled slightly, loosened his grip, and the seed fell to the ground. A dark green light connected the seed to his finger. The seed grew rapidly upon contact with the ground, sprouting vines in the blink of an eye. These vines glowed green, twisting and growing like tentacles. Within a few breaths, they formed a pavilion around them, complete with 2 chairs made of twisted vines and a table. Frederick was stunned by the scene, his mouth wide open. When the green light faded, he instinctively reached out to poke at the vines, then looked up at the emerald green leaves. "Let's take a break," Matthias said triumphantly as he sat down. "Maybe we can strengthen the first batch of wheat seeds this afternoon." Frederick sat down and immediately asked, "Is this a real plant?" "Yes," Matthias replied. "It's still alive, but it won't last much longer." "Why?" Frederick asked in surprise. "Simple," Matthias shrugged. "Its roots have absorbed all the water and nutrients from the surrounding soil. It'll soon starve to death." Frederick jumped out of the pavilion and found that the surrounding land was indeed much drier than elsewhere. He immediately asked the village chief to bring someone to water the land. The village chief and the villagers were already terrified, and Frederick had to go over and kick each one before they reacted. Matthias smiled and said to Frederick, who had returned to the pavilion, "If you prune it regularly and water and fertilize it, this pavilion will live a long time." Frederick didn't respond, rubbing his chin in thought. Chapter 43 Strengthening Seeds. A tree-like pavilion suddenly appeared next to the threshing ground, which immediately attracted the farmers working in the fields. Even the peasant woman who was chasing her husband with a pitchfork stopped to watch the fun. Frederick sat quietly in the vine pavilion for a while, then asked Matthias, "Do you know which plants are the most profitable to grow?" Matthias, with an expression that said, "I knew you'd ask that," shook his head and said, "Forget about expensive medicinal herbs. The active ingredients in many medicinal plants require years of accumulation. Those produced by magic are like firewood. For example, I can make a grape seed grow into a full crop in half a day, but the grapes won't taste like grapes at all, bland as water. Only the next year will produce normal grapes. Forget wheat, for example. The amount of wheat produced is calculated by the plant. Even if I could only produce 2 or 3 plants at a time, I wouldn't be able to grow enough for my own consumption even if I died of exhaustion." Frederick raised an eyebrow and asked, "Can the wheat produced by magic be sown?" Matthias replied, "Ordinary magic plants have many times more root systems than naturally grown plants, which allows them to absorb enough nutrients in a short period of time. If the soil is not fertile, it is normal for the ears to be empty and shriveled, and few grains can be sown normally. I'm good at strengthening fruits. The strengthened fruits have certain characteristics under the influence of magic. At this time, The seeds are often affected by a large amount of magic power and lose their activity. Frederick nodded. It seems that there are some problems with the magic-induced growth of fruits. Matthias pointed to the magic circle outside and continued, similarly, the seeds used for this vine have also been magically enhanced, targeting the strength of the vine. The enhanced seeds allow them to grow naturally, which is different from magical growth. It can grow like ordinary crops. Frederick discovered a problem and asked, in that case, why doesn't anyone else use this technology of magic-enhanced seeds? No one can resist the temptation of food growth. If I were the king, I would definitely make you a duke, Matthias boasted, and after a long humph he said, because I invented this magic, the first one used was the grape I just told you about. I made its fruit bigger and sweeter. It's a pity that I haven't sold it yet, and the fighting in Constantinople broke out. I don't know which bastard started a battlefield in my manor, and now I have nothing. Frederick opened his mouth, not knowing what to say to comfort him for a moment. He thought of a brother in his previous life who was unable to graduate with a doctorate because the crops he cultivated were stolen. He thought for a moment and said, I think if this trial is successful, you could make a fortune just selling the seeds. Matthias said seriously, I think so too. I plan to collaborate with you in a few years if we see results. Frederick naturally agreed, saying, I have an estate east of Wessenland. Why don't we build a dedicated crop research chamber there for convenient experiments? Matthias hesitated, adding, but according to my theory, seeds that have been strengthened once will deteriorate back to their original state after 2 or 3 generations. Frederick's smile widened. He understood the importance of a seed company like this better than anyone else. At the very least, it was profitable, but if it became large, it would strangle the throats of others. That's okay, he said. We can sell seeds every year and use the profits to research higher-yielding crops. Matthias thought about it and quickly grasped the principle of squeezing toothpaste without any guidance. Very well, the royal plant master's eyes gleamed with gold, his smile radiant. We'll discuss this once you're done with resettling the victims. I'll put together a plan in the meantime. Frederick naturally agreed, adding, I have a priority project you can think about. Matthias perked up immediately. Pointing to a lush green field in the distance, Frederick said, I'm making a lot of money from Wessen's syrup, but there's a way to make even more. The sweet radishes in that field taste a bit sweet. That sugar is much sweeter than Wessen's syrup, but the sugar content in their roots is too low to be used to make sugar. Think about whether there's a way to increase the sugar content in their tubers. If we can extract even sweeter sugar from them, we'll make a fortune. In those days, before plant taxonomy, beets resembled radishes and were known as sweet radishes because they were slightly sweet. However, beets didn't have a high sugar content, so they couldn't be used to make sugar. They were eaten as vegetables. Frederick made a fortune from maltose, but maltose was far less sweet than white sugar. Once white sugar became mass-produced, it was hard not to become wealthy. Matthias thought for a moment and said, I'm not familiar with sweet radishes. Their roots are sweet. I can start by strengthening the magic of the roots and devise more plans for comparison. Since Frederick didn't have the technical expertise, he decided to let the professionals handle it. The two discussed other crop cultivation options for a while. Matthias checked the magic circle, while Frederick watched the wheat seeds piled nearby. Choosing Lizzie Village for the experiment wasn't without its advantages. Wessenland University had signed an agreement with the villagers. If the harvest yielded less than the same period last year, the university would pay compensation. If it exceeded, the villagers would benefit. Because the president of Wessenland University was Baron Wessenland, the villagers agreed out of trust in the young master. Frederick discussed the agreement with the village chief, reassuring the villagers while examining the wheat seeds in the basket. By noon, the magic circle was finally complete. At lunch, while eating bran steamed bread with chestnut flour and pea and pork offal soup, Frederick asked Matthias, isn't it safe for someone to steal this magic circle if we just leave it there? No, Matthias said mysteriously. This magic circle is just a tool, like a wand. The real power comes from my manipulation. Frederick looked as if he'd seen it, and a sigh of relief settled in. He took a few bites of the peas and pork offal. The taste wasn't too terrible. It was busy farming season, the only time farmers could eat lunch and meat. Since the invention of steamed bread, the people of Wesson County could steam anything. These steamed bread were something they'd invented without any instruction. There were now people selling steamers that could be placed above the soup pot, allowing them to steam the steamed bread in the basket while the soup cooked. The risk of tainted flavors was nothing compared to the firewood savings. After lunch, the farmers began moving the wheat seeds into the spot in the magic circle designated by Matthias. Matthias chanted nearby, and soon after, he activated a magic circle. Green magical elements continuously gathered above it, engulfing the baskets of wheat seeds, gradually moving violently like a surging sea. After a few minutes, a noticeable to an outsider, the magic circle ceased, and the magical elements quickly dissipated. The baskets were quickly removed, and the wheat seeds within glowed with a vibrant green light that took a while to dissipate. The farmers looked at each other, wondering if this would increase their yields. Chapter 44, Chatting about Magic. For the past 2 days, whenever he had a free moment, Frederick had taken out a few wheat seeds to study. Before leaving Chestnut Village, he'd asked for a handful of fortified wheat seeds and examined them carefully, even biting a few. However, he couldn't discern any difference between these seeds and ordinary wheat. They were practically indistinguishable when mixed together, until he met an expert. He was currently in a place called Oak Village, where the canal excavation headquarters were located. The civil engineering experts at the University of Wessenland had optimized the canal's route based on Frederick's survey and design, shortening its length from 16 kilometers to less than 10 kilometers and building a dedicated commercial city in Oak Village. While the distance was shortened, the overall workload remained relatively unchanged, as they only had to dig through a few small hills. Craftsmen and workers from the Nuremberg Stonemasons Guild, having received a 30% advance payment, began arriving. Frederick had come to meet with their master craftsman, Edward, to discuss construction details. Civil engineers from the University of Wessenland were also working there, currently led by Vice President Manuel. As soon as the necromancer saw the wheat seeds in Frederick's hand, he asked, "Principal, where did you find this wheat? It has such strong vitality." "Oh," Frederick asked him in surprise, "can you tell?" Manuel sat down on a chair nearby, took the wheat seeds from Frederick, took a look, and said, "We necromancers are evil people who manipulate vitality, so we are particularly sensitive to it, just like a drunkard can smell which kind of wine is stronger, and a rider can tell which horse is better at a glance." Frederick had not yet discussed necromancy with him, so taking advantage of some time before the project meeting, he asked, "I heard that you can also manipulate corpses." Manuel said, "Yes. But it has to be a corpse that has died only a few days ago and still has muscles." The necromancy of manipulating corpses uses a simulated vitality to give the corpse a false life. It's like a puppet in our hands. Because of this, we are demons in the eyes of ordinary people, and some people will make us important figures in their conspiracy. For example, someone poisoned his father and asked the necromancer to control the corpse like a living person and declare that all the property would be given to the murderer. There are some more disgusting things. You will know when you grow up. We also appear on the battlefield and can make dead soldiers die several times. When Constantine was in civil strife, a warlord asked us to hand over all the women in the university and library to his army to be raped. We said that he and the officers would come in to choose first, and then poison them all at the banquet. Later, I controlled the warlord's corpse in order to make way to the port, but we were discovered halfway. His behavior was inconsistent with the past. We were halfway through a retreat, so we fought a battle. At that time, the senior officers of that army were all dead, and I made the dead soldiers stand up again to scare them away. In the end, we all escaped to the ship and left Constantine. Frederick understood after listening, but he still had a question. "Hey, didn't they say that necromancers can control skeletons?" Manuel shook his head and said, "Those are necromancers. Their professional field is virtual souls. The golem puppet control core studied by All Might was developed from them. In our eyes, necromancers and golem puppeteers are actually different branches of the same magic system. Both are based on virtual souls, but necromancers use magic element muscles to control bones, while golem puppeteers make their own magic muscles and metal skeletons, but you can't tell this to All Might. They hate to be compared with necromancers." Frederick understood and thought that the magical world was really wonderful. He pointed at the wheat seeds and said, "This is the seed strengthened by Matthias. It is said that it can increase the yield." Manuel suddenly realized and said, "I see. No wonder he asked me for advice on vitality before." Frederick asked curiously, "So, the seeds are infused with a false vitality of necromancy?" "No." Manuel shook his head. "The vitality of these wheats is real. I think he used some method to increase the vitality and make it more active. Such wheat is more lively and more durable than ordinary wheat. There is no problem in increasing yield. He is such a genius. This kind of thing only exists in theory, but he can actually achieve it through external control. In theory, if this method can be used on humans, it can make people immortal. Frederick was frightened by this magic that could change fate and change the world. He wondered if he should ask Matthias if his QQ number was 337,845,818. But that's only theoretical. Manuel shrugged, returning the wheat seeds to Frederick. The human body is like a colander, and vitality is like water. As the body ages, the leaks become more and more, and the water leaks out faster and faster, until eventually no amount of vitality is enough. Currently, there's no definitive answer to how vitality affects the body. The only consensus is that false vitality that exceeds the human body's tolerance limit will cause mutations. Another very important point, whether enhancement is controllable has never been determined. My teacher's teacher once tried to enhance his own vitality with false vitality. He spent a lot of time perfecting his theory, and eventually the sphincter became like wings. My teacher experimented with chickens, and the chicken grew 6 wings and died soon after. I don't dare follow their path again, and I won't let my students venture into this field. Compared to humans and other animals, plants are much simpler and more tolerant of mutations. Matthias's plants used to be unsightly, and he was ridiculed for a long time. Now he must have found a pattern from his countless failures. From my understanding, he strengthened the ear of wheat with limitations, and I guess the root system as well. Frederick was lost in a state of awe. For a moment, he couldn't comprehend the underlying principle, simply treating it like space radiation breeding. I'm confused, he thought, a new question swirling in his mind. This magic is so powerful, why does the scene look so ordinary? Manuel laughed, thinking that this was just how children should think. The more flamboyant the magic, the greater its power. You can't judge magic by its appearance, he said, raising his right hand. A few breaths later, a black ball the size of a ping-pong ball appeared above his hand. The black ball didn't reflect any light, like charcoal, and looked ordinary. He smiled and asked Frederick, "What do you think of this magic?" Frederick looked left and right, unable to see anything special. "Isn't this magic powerful?" he asked. Manuel didn't answer, but raised his left hand and conjured another identical, seemingly ordinary black ball. He then asked, "Which of these two magics do you think would kill you instantly?" Frederick's expression suddenly grew serious. He looked left and right, unable to detect any difference between the two magic balls. Finally, he could only shake his head and say, "I can't tell." Manuel motioned for Frederick to go outside with him. They arrived outside the village and found 2 large trees within the red line of the canal that were ready to be cut down. Manuel didn't move a muscle as 2 black balls flew towards the trunks, growing larger as they went. The trunks, which required 2 or 3 people to hug, were like ice meeting hot water when they came into contact with the 1-meter diameter black magic balls, corroding and disappearing at a visible rate. Frederick's mouth twitched. "Oh my God, both of them can kill me." Then he and Manuel broke into a run, and the tree fell towards them. Once they reached safety, 2 more black magic balls appeared in Manuel's hands. Frederick examined them carefully and found that they were the same as before. Frederick was then covered in a mess, but he was completely unharmed. On the way back to the village, Manuel said to Frederick, "The effect and power of a spell cannot be judged solely by its appearance. Today's magicians will deliberately disguise powerful spells as simple ones. A slight mistake in a magic battle will lead to loss of life, so all conceivable methods must be used." Extending from this, when magicians invent new magic, they will make some special designs for the appearance of the magic, preventing outsiders from seeing the magic circuit, but its interior is not ambiguous at all. Frederick looked as if he had suddenly realized something, thinking that there was such a saying. Chapter 45 Project Meeting. When Frederick and Manuel returned to the Oak Village office, everyone involved in today's project meeting had arrived. There wasn't a meeting room here. Like any other villager meeting, everyone sat in chairs around the fire pit. A pot of tea simmered in a hanging pot, and anyone who wanted a drink could scoop it into a cup. Frederick scooped himself a cup of tea and calmly sipped it from his chair. Now, at last, they could sit down and discuss the canal. He named it the Carolina Canal after his mother. Today was the first general meeting of the Carolina Canal project team. In attendance were the client's father, Baron Friedrich von Wessen, the client's representative, Afu, the Wessen family steward, Professor Enerd, a civil engineer representing the University of Wessenberg, the design firm, Edward, the master craftsman of the Nuremberg Stonemasons Guild, the general manager of the construction unit, and Clement, Bishop of the Church of Light Wessenberg Cathedral, the supervisor. Edward had worked on many projects, but this was new to him. He was confused about what these priests were doing. Bishop Clement had no idea why he'd been invited, but after hearing the deal was worth about 60 florins, he came anyway. The Wesson family had never been easily fooled by the priests. With few donations in the past, the priests lived on a tight budget. A few dozen gold coins was a significant sum. Frederick, cup in hand, glanced at everyone and began, "I'm delighted to meet with you all today. Let's work together to build the Carolina Canal, a project that will transform the continent's economy. Every job has its own rules. I'll explain them now. If you don't understand or have objections, let's discuss them together. Once we agree on something, we must abide by it. Is that all right with you?" This was perfectly normal, and no one objected. Frederick pointed at Afu and said, "He will be my representative on the project, responsible for coordination management, time management, project quality review and project payment." Then he pointed at Einhard and said, "Professor Einhard is the representative of the design party. The canal was designed by him and his students. In principle, the construction shall be based on the construction drawings. If any problems are encountered during construction, he will be responsible for solving them. If necessary, the design can be changed. If there are major changes, I will review them in written form and then I can increase the money." Edward's eyes began to light up when he heard this. Previous projects were all lump sum contracts, and the client often changed things here and there without adding money. It was unprecedented to get a pay raise for working here. Then Frederick poured cold water on him. "Edward, you quoted based on the drawings. It's good for you to get a raise, but I'm not one to be trifled with. The documents for the increase will ultimately require my approval. I have a master here who reviews them. You can try to raise the price arbitrarily." The master Frederick was referring to was actually himself. In his previous life, he had worked his way up from construction worker to project manager, from plumbing and electrical installation to dry land conversion to wet land. He had seen everything. Edward quickly calmed down, recalling the detailed prices in the original contract, the price per man day, the earthwork unit price, the transportation costs, and immediately realized that this was a provision for the project changes. He patted his chest with his strong arms and said, "Baron, rest assured. We make money with a clear conscience. Your willingness to give us 30% in gold coins is a sign of your trust in us. We won't do anything that would harm your interests." Frederick nodded and said, "Keep working hard. I haven't even started looking for people to work on the bridges over the canal yet. You understand?" Edward's smile widened. If he didn't understand the hint, then his life was in vain. Frederick nodded to Bishop Clement and said, "Your Excellency and the other priests are responsible for overseeing the work. Not only the work of the craftsmen, but also ensuring that we pay according to the contract. Our contract requires a 30% advance payment, with the remaining 50% payable in 10 installments. The final balance will be settled after the first ship passes through the canal. One of your responsibilities is to confirm the completion of each milestone by signing their payment request, and also to sign the payment receipt once we have paid." Frederick did not expect the priest to possess the architectural expertise to oversee the project, nor was the current situation conducive to establishing a professional supervision company. Digging the canal required only measuring the length, width, and height and calculating the earthwork, which was still manageable. Financial matters were prone to disputes, and Frederick did not want to waste his energy on such matters, so he sought a third party, recognized by both parties, to act as a witness. Bishop Clement, believing he understood Frederick's point, said he had never seen or heard of such a case of delayed payment. He bowed slightly and praised him, saying, "Baron Wesson's kindness will surely be blessed by the God of Light. We will do our job well." Frederick gave him a slight nod of thanks, then asked Edward, "Do you agree with that?" Edward's smile never faded. His greatest fear was naturally the client's default on payment. Now with a priest as witness, if Baron Wesson didn't pay, the case could be brought before the king. "I agree," he replied happily. Frederick nodded slightly and said, "This is hard-earned money. If you encounter any difficulties, please share them immediately and we can work together to resolve them. From now on the 5th and 10th of each month, just like we do now, we will sit down together to discuss any issues we can't resolve and ultimately find a solution. I'll come when I'm free, mainly to deal with the major issues." Edward immediately patted his chest and said, "Rest assured, Baron, we will listen to you." Frederick simply nodded, his words unclear. "Don't worry," he said. "All the wages are already in my coffers. As long as you do the work, you'll get paid. As long as you cut down the trees within the canal's red line, the first payment will be due." Edward immediately said, "Our carpenters are already arriving. There's no delay in cutting down trees and building the cabins." Frederick nodded, then said, "Pay attention to fire prevention in the residence. A fire would be a disaster." He then discussed the craftsmen's food, clothing, housing, and transportation in detail. After the meeting, Frederick dismissed everyone and quietly drank a cup of tea, breathing a sigh of relief. This canal construction project was not only a major undertaking within the territory but also a great opportunity to promote Wessenland to other territories. The future development of Wessenland required the recruitment of craftsmen from surrounding areas. Setting an example where good work would earn a share of the wages would ensure a lack of demand. Chapter 46, Doing a Little Experiment. The clear sky suddenly darkened, and in the time it took to finish a cup of tea, ink spilled onto the azure paper. A strong wind blew, whistling and shaking the branches of the massive oak tree in the center of the village. Ripe acorns clattered to the ground like rain. The children of Frederick's age, laughing and shouting, rushed to the tree with great joy, as if it were a festival. Some children stripped off their clothes to place their trophies on the tree, while others placed them directly inside their clothes through their collars, pressing their free hand against their stomachs to prevent the acorns from falling out. Ripe acorns are a vital dietary supplement for the villagers. Raw, they have a bitter taste with a subtle fragrance, so they are boiled in water to remove the bitterness, roasted and shelled, or ground into powder for use in baking. The oak tree in the center of the village stood over 60 meters tall, with a crown diameter of nearly 80 meters. Its trunk required several people to hold it. No one knew how old the oak tree was, the elders only remembered it standing there when they were young. A legend circulated within the village: when their ancestors fled here, they had no food, and everyone was hungry and exhausted. Then a strong wind blew, and the acorns that fell saved their lives. So they decided to settle down here, building their village around the oak tree. The wind grew stronger, bringing a hint of chill. A single orange-red oak leaf swirled in the wind, falling along with a raindrop in front of a pair of small leather shoes. Frederick sat on the steps before the village hall, his right hand resting on his knee, his chin resting, as he glanced at the messenger of autumn. When he looked up, the sky was filled with pea-sized raindrops and a dull rumble of thunder. The children gathering acorns had vanished in the blink of an eye. A few drops of raindrops touched Frederick's face, chilling. The village chief wanted to invite the young master to shelter at the village hall, but Afu stopped him with a hand, silently shaking his head. Everyone in the castle knew that the young master had a habit since childhood. When it rained, he would often sit alone and watch the rain, especially at night. Whenever a downpour struck, Frederick couldn't help but recall a night when a truck and torrential rain accompanied a trip to a certain island nation. He remembered the moment the truck was about to hit someone. Another person rushed over to push him out of the way and was hit as well. Then, the truck lost control and slammed into him, and the last thing he heard before he lost consciousness: "Damn, we hit the wrong person, and we hit one more person." At such times, he tried to clear his mind and not think about anything else. Lately, Frederick had been constantly brooding on various matters, his mind never getting a moment's rest. Today, he was giving it a rare break. The rain intensified, lightning flashed across the sky, and water gradually began to pool on the ground. The sky quickly darkened, and the faint scent of cooking smoke could be smelled through the storm. Soon, the smell of dinner wafted from the village hall. Pea and vegetable soup was boiling, and in a steamer above the pot, bread with acorn flour, enough to serve as armor, was being softened. Blood sausage, made from offal, minced meat, and blood, was roasting by the fire, and a small cheese pot, the size of a fist, was melting cheese. Afu spread a tablecloth on the table by the fire pit, lit a candle, and when dinner was ready, he served the pea and vegetable soup, placed the steamed bread in a basket, and placed the roasted blood sausage on a plate, topped with melted cheese. Dinner was ready, and Afu went outside to invite the young master to dinner. As soon as Frederick sat down, the village chief began to play his tuneless six-stringed guitar and sing. In the oak forest, in the green oak forest, stands the forester's house. Every morning, you can see it. In the fresh, free morning mist, the forester's little daughter runs out. The forester's daughter runs out full of life. In the past, Count Wesson, like other nobles, would have singers to entertain him at his meals. Oak Village had no singers, So the old village chief took the stage himself, singing folk songs. Tonight's pea and vegetable soup was quite delicious, the acorn bread was passable, the blood sausage had a unique flavor, the cheese was a bit sour, and the guest singer was a bit off-key and mispronounced. Frederick quietly finished his dinner and had Alfred give the village chief a cruise silver coin. The village nights were marked by early bedtimes. There were no lights, only the sound of wind, rain, and the rustling of oak branches. Frederick let Alfu and the others rest. He sat by the fire, roasting acorns the village chief had just brought home. He flipped through the canal diagram on his lap with his right hand to clear his mind. With his left hand, palm up, 10 small balls of different magical elements swirled endlessly above it. After these daily pre-bedtime exercises, he could now make these elemental balls move simultaneously on different orbits, like electrons, though his speed was still slow when he was multitasking. After studying the diagram for a while, an idea suddenly struck Frederick. Magical elements move according to patterns to form magic. What if their movement were accelerated? He acted immediately, putting the heavy parchment diagram back and sitting by the fire, attempting to condense an ice ball. The ice element was unique. It was an intermediate form between fire and water. Perhaps fire should be called heat. Ice ball magic was simple in design, with relatively few magic circuits, making it easy to manipulate. Under his mental control, the ice element within the ice ball accelerated faster and faster, and in the blink of an eye, a spherical layer of solid ice formed around the magic circuits. Frederick tapped the finger-sized ball of ice with the tongs. It seemed quite solid. He didn't stop, constantly increasing the speed of the ice element within without increasing the total amount. After a few breaths, all the ice element had transformed into solid ice. He then dropped the ball into the teapot on the fire pit. If it were an ordinary ice ball, the slightly boiling tea would have turned into an iced drink. If the fire element could have the same effect, it should be able to bring the frozen tea back to boil. The next moment, a chill swept through the hall, making Frederick shiver. Not only the tea in the pot, but even the charcoal in the fire pit was instantly extinguished by the cold. Frederick's mouth twitched in surprise, and he immediately relit the fire to warm himself. He didn't dare try the fireball spell again, fearing a fire. The fire pit quickly burst into flames, and the chill in the hall quickly dissipated. After warming himself up, Frederick had another idea. He thought of the particle collider. What would happen if magical elements collided? This time, he didn't dare use the destructive magic elements. Light elements were safer. Frederick clasped his hands in front of him. Between them, 2 rings the size of ping-pong balls appeared, with light elements spinning in opposite directions. When they reached a high speed, the 2 rings overlapped. A flash of white light appeared, and the colliding light elements scattered like a beautiful firework. He thought this would be fun. He could show it off to Maria. So he decided to try again, speeding up the light elements to make them appear even more brilliant. The light elements in the 2 rings kept speeding up until Frederick reached his limit. Then, he overlapped the 2 counter-rotating rings once more. A flash of white light, a loud bang, and the roof of the village hall disappeared. Frederick came to his senses and found himself perched on the oak tree, with cold icy rain lashing his face. Chapter 47: A Possibility. The massive explosion at the village hall caused considerable damage to Oak Village. 5 people, including Frederick, Alf, Frederick's driver, and his guard, were resident there at the time. All 5 were blown away. Alf was thrown into a nearby chicken coop, killing 3 hens and suffering multiple scrapes and bruises. The guard on guard at the village hall gate was thrown flat, leaving a deep ditch in the rain-softened mud and dislocating his left shoulder. A guard resting at the gate fell onto a rooftop, his right leg hitting a beam and fracturing it. The driver, a mere ordinary man, survived this incident, falling on a pile of straw and suffering only 2 broken ribs and a gash in his head. The perpetrator, who had been thrown into an oak tree, had a magical dagger, original belonging to the Grand Duke of Mainz, given to him by Maria. The protective magic within the scabbard activated, sparing him serious injury, save for a branch piercing his gluteus maximus. The blown-off roofs caused considerable damage when they fell, piercing many houses. Fortunately, the heaviest main beams crashed into the pigsty, preventing significant damage. The entire Oak Village was thrown into chaos. Fortunately, Manuel and Bishop Clement, who were staying with the farmer, stepped in immediately and directed the students and priests to calm the people and treat the injured. By dawn, the rain had stopped, and the village was peaceful. The next day, the rain had stopped, and thanks to Bishop Clement and other priests, the injured people and livestock were largely unharmed. Frederick was immediately bundled into a carriage and taken back to Weissenberg, where chaos reigned. Richardner, who was stationed in Weissenberg, heard the news and immediately dropped his fishing rod and rushed back to the castle. Upon reaching Frederick's bedroom, he saw him leaning against the headboard, looking well, though his head was covered in a bump. So serious, Richardner was shocked. He reached out and touched his head, which resembled a Buddha's. "Does it hurt? Are you dizzy? Do you feel like vomiting?" Frederick grimaced in pain, wincing and replying, "I'm fine. Psyche poked at my head, just now." Psyche had been prodding him in the head and scolding him for half an hour. Richardner was startled to find Psyche sitting in a chair by the window, her face a dark, horrifying color. He asked curiously, "What's going on?" Psyche replied coldly, "Nothing. He simply encountered a realm you haven't, and nearly killed himself." Richardner immediately understood the situation. Turning to Frederick, he said sternly, "I don't know what you did, but remember that among the most foolish ways to die, being killed by your own magic ranks among the top." Frederick immediately replied, "I remember." He understood the principle, but he had originally intended to create a fireworks display and had never heard of anything special about the collision of magical elements. He didn't expect it turned in an explosion. Richardner didn't ask what he had done. Though they were master and apprentice, they each had their own secrets to protect their own lives. He simply said, "Rest well. Tell me if you feel any discomfort. If there are any after effects, it will be difficult to deal with later. Let others handle the work. If you don't, return your salary." Frederick nodded in agreement. Suddenly, the bedroom window flew open, and Katie scurried in. She ignored the sweat dripping from her brow. Psyche by the window, and her father across the bed. She stalked to the bedside, her eyes sharp as a sword. She demanded, "Who did it? Has the person been apprehended? Do you know who ordered it? If open retaliation isn't feasible, should I find someone to help? Those guys from the Freedom Society still owe me a favor." Frederick quickly replied, "No one was trying to assassinate me. I was experimenting with magic when something went wrong. I had a magic shield to protect me. I'm fine now." Katie asked uncertainly, "Really? It's really not an assassination attempt, so you're spreading false news, really?" Frederick nodded. "You?" Katie suddenly became angry, poking Frederick's head with her finger and lecturing him. "Do you know that being killed by your own magic is one of the top 3 stupidest ways to die? How much do you know about magic now? You haven't even mastered the basics, and you're just messing around. What if you die?" Frederick nodded, grimacing in pain. The senior sister had poked him hard, using the same technique as Psyche. Now the bump on his head was symmetrical. "Rest well." Katie pinched Frederick's cheek. "I'll make you something delicious." Katie left the bedroom, followed by Richard. As she left, she heard someone say, "Katie, I need to talk to you about the Freedom Society." The bedroom was left with only Frederick and Psyche, and an eerie silence fell for a moment. After Frederick returned, Psyche was the first to arrive. After learning what had happened, she poked him in the head, trying to teach him a lesson. Frederick was still baffled. Why could the collision of magical elements cause such a violent explosion? Faced with this question, Psyche locked the doors and windows, cast a soundproof barrier, and then sat down on the bed, sighed, and said seriously, "You have touched upon the essence of this world's magical elements, huh?" Frederick nearly jumped out of bed in shock. Psyche continued, "It's possible to generate this enormous amount of energy with relatively little energy. If it were made into a weapon, it could flatten Weissenberg, literally flattening it both physically and geometrically." Frederick's expression changed several times in an instant, and he struggled to calm down his shock. What the hell was going on? Had he rubbed a nuclear bomb with his own hands? Frederick immediately thought of a question, but, "I've never heard of such a thing before." Psyche reached out and pinched his cheek, then calmly said, "Do you consider yourself ordinary? Be careful, study slowly. The world might change because of you." Frederick curled his lips and said, "Then why don't you change?" Psyche shrugged and said, "I'm just a passerby." Frederick's eyes lit up. This was the first time she had mentioned her identity, so he took the opportunity to ask, "Who are you?" Psyche smiled faintly and replied, "Why do you think I'm human, huh?" Frederick was stunned, at a loss for words. Psyche simply gave him a sly smile and left the bedroom. Frederick spent a while in his bedroom contemplating his next work schedule until Katie arrived with lunch. He was surprised to see a sausage pizza. The crust was small, likely made from pre-made steamed bundo. The pizza, specially prepared for the local conditions, tasted delicious. Frederick ate it with great pleasure, and Katie smiled kindly. "Sister," Frederick suddenly asked, "condition a ring like this and make the magic elements inside spin as fast as possible." Katie didn't understand why, but she did as she was told, conjuring a blue ring of water elements above her palm. The water element continued to accelerate within the ring, eventually reaching its limit. Frederick realized something was wrong. Katie's strength was impressive, but her ability to control the movement of magic elements wasn't very fast. An idea suddenly struck him, and he thought of a possibility. Chapter 48, Do Some Sports. Letter after letter was sent from Wessenberg to the people of Wessenland. In it, Frederick explained his accidental injury and gave instructions for the upcoming work. Although his health was not seriously affected, everyone urged him to rest and even forbade him from practicing magic. He had been sneaking out for the past few days under the pretext of going out for fun to recreate the explosion that night, reducing the scale and keeping the magic away to ensure safety. He had made some progress, but after being discovered, his work was also banned. After the initial chaos, the various teams had gained experience and their work had become more organized. Both the senior leaders and the younger assistants were able to carry out their tasks effectively. Even the ordinary staff were energized by the year-end bonuses. The recent news that Wessenland would build a new city, upgrade 4 cities, and create more than 20 towns, with officials selected from those who performed well in the previous work, was a welcome relief. A fragrant scallion pancake was placed before everyone. After the heavy rains, river levels rose significantly, prompting the previously suspended water transport plan to be reactivated, and a transit camp established outside Wessenberg. It was expected that the transport of all disaster victims would be completed within 2 weeks. So, after meeting with George, the Grand Duke of Mainz, and allocating him a piece of land for a glass workshop, Frederick suddenly found himself with some free time. The paper-making workshop was currently constructing a small production line for a trial run. Katie, surprisingly experienced in directing personnel, who knows where she got that experience, kept the construction site in perfect order. Katie now went to the kitchen early every morning before work to make a snack for Frederick. This day, she first sautéed onions in olive oil, then added the southern rice sent by Madame Sophie and stir-fried it. Then, she added water to cook it into rice. Finally, she wrapped the rice balls with cheese and fried them until golden brown. The result was a delicious fried rice ball. "Very good." Richardel walked into the restaurant, walked to Frederick, picked up the fried rice ball and finished it in 2 bites. "It tastes better than what Mafia made." Frederick hurriedly protected the remaining part. It was given to him by Katie, and even the master could not snatch it away. Richardel grabbed the second one and ate it while saying, "The other day I was walking down the street and got hungry, so I asked a little girl on the street to buy a few fried rice balls from her basket. Mafia first bought me one, and I thought it was delicious, so I wanted to buy a few more. Guess what happened next?" "No guesses," Frederick pouted. "You'd definitely let me give you one first." Richardel smiled and continued, "Mafia gave me the whole basket of fried rice balls, then pulled a small dagger from the bottom of the basket, rushed out onto the street, and stabbed a fat man in the kidney. As she ran past me, she yelled, 'Run,' as if I were her accomplice." Frederick said speechlessly, "She framed you and used you as a shield." "Yes," Richardel said with a smirk on his face. "But I'm happy with it." At the time, Mafia's father was assassinated by a coalition of other families. That day was her first act of revenge, Psyche then said. Then that bastard led the gang to Mafia and acted like a hero saving the damsel in distress. Frederick was speechless, but even more speechless was coming. Psyche continued, "That year, Mafia was 13, Frederick picked up the plate of fried rice balls and moved away." Richardel immediately changed the subject, saying to Frederick, "Katie told me about your search for a lens grinder. The Doge of Venice owes me a favor, so I wrote to him and asked him to send some. I also had someone send your book, The Nature of Light, over there. It's a short list of pages, so I'll be able to copy it and sell it next year." Frederick immediately presented a fried rice ball to thank his master. While eating the fried rice ball, Richardel continued, "I say, you shouldn't always stay in your study. Go out and play more. Children should play games, right?" Frederick curled his lips and said, "What games are there now? Entertainment was scarce these days. Even a Rubik's Cube could make the Grand Duke of Mainz obsessed, and some of the games common among the nobility weren't suitable for children." Richardel said, "If you can't play alone, then find some more people to play with you." Frederick's eyes suddenly lit up, and he turned to Taro and said, "Go down and get base." Then the leatherworker, and the carpenter, Taro immediately agreed. She had been feeling down lately. That day, she had to go back to Wessenberg to prepare winter clothes for Frederick, so she didn't go with him to Oak Village. As a result, the master had something wrong at that time, so as a maid dedicated to caring for the master, she felt a little guilty. Seeing this, Richardel knew he was up to something new. The carpenter and leatherworker were the first to arrive. The castle had its own carpentry and leatherwork workshops, and they came over at the first call. Base soon followed and asked, "Principal, are you looking for some new business to make money?" Frederick smiled and said, "Yes, some sports to pass the time." Richardel and others had recently stopped him from working, so he decided to try some sports. It would give the people in the territory something to do to pass the time, and it would also strengthen their sense of collective honor and unity through collective exercise. Frederick gestured and asked BASF, "Can you make some hollow rubber balls this big, strong, and inexpensive? I want them to be impact-resistant and bounce." BASF thought for a moment and said, "That's no problem. Just make a hemispherical mold, press it out, and glue it together." Frederick nodded and said, "Okay, take note. Let's make some." Then he drew a plan and said to the carpenter, "Make a few tables this big. Make the top smooth, with a net this high in the middle. Paint this here white, and this here dark. Then make a few sets of wooden boards like this, with handles like this." Frederick quickly finished explaining the recipe for the complete ping-pong set, except the balls were made of rubber. No one knew what it was for, so they wrote it down. Then, drawing a diagram, Frederick said to Base, the leatherworker, and the carpenter, "Make another ball this big. Make it sturdy, with a tube here for pumping air. Wrap the outside of the ball with pieces of soft, well-knit leather like this. Make it sturdy. Leave a slit here for the tube. Make a bellows, and connect a tube to the air outlet, so it aligns with the tube on the ball. Make 2 more wooden frames this big, and hang sturdy fishing nets on them." The air nozzle for the football couldn't be made anymore, so they'd have to tie the air tubes together. The venue was easy to find. The river between Wessenberg University and the north side of Wessenberg was lined with large, flat grasslands. Originally used for cavalry horse racing and soldier training, it wouldn't be a problem to build a few football fields. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49. The game begins. With the arrival of September, the weather cooled, prompting people to layer up. The suit trend introduced by Frederick was gradually gaining acceptance in Wessenland. The simple fact that long johns could be worn underneath loose-fitting trousers without compromising appearance was enough to convince even the wealthy and respectable to choose it. By the time Frederick came to his senses, the turtleneck and suit combination had already emerged, along with a baseball cap. Katie wore a slim-fitting women's suit one day and a waisted trench coat the next, keeping the Wessenland tailors busy again. Everywhere has its diehards, and Richardel was quite critical of his daughter's overly fitted clothing, making subtle insinuations about it every now and then. But at any given time, there were always young people who pursued fashion, and many, like Katie, simply kept their clothes in their carriages, wearing traditional clothes at home and changing into a new outfit in the carriages when they went out. Many fathers shared Richardel's frustrations. In the taverns, they sang, "I've been feeling rather annoyed lately, rather annoyed, rather annoyed." Bryant shared the same anxieties. Young people were also following fashion trends. Craftsmen like him had plenty of money, but suits were inconvenient to work in. He visited Frederick at the stadium. Then, in this world, jeans disappeared. They were called blacksmith pants, and blue-dyed canvas was also called blacksmith cloth. So, with his blacksmith cloth jacket and pants, Brian became the epitome of working-class fashion. Recently, many cargo ships had arrived in Wessenland, and word of the canal had spread, attracting merchants from other regions to open shops. 2 brothers from a northern peninsula, originally canvas sellers, saw people making clothing with canvas in Wessenland and decided to switch careers. On the autumnal equinox of 1024, a carriage arrived at Wessenberg at noon. "Father, look," Maria shouted from the carriage, pointing at the crowd outside the window. So many people are wearing the same clothes as Frederick. Philip smiled and replied, of course, this is Frederick's home. The work of sheltering the refugees ended quietly. The refugees who walked slowly were taken away by the proactive shelter teams. Now no more refugees arrived. The camps in various places had begun to be dismantled. Philip thought the tents in the camps were nice, so he bought them all. There were still some follow-up matters. Philip had heard that Frederick was ill and could not continue working, so he came to discuss it with him. Maria found out and followed him to play with Frederick. But Philip was a little puzzled. Why did so many people leave the city of Wessenland today and head north happily? Was there some event going on? He sent his servants to inquire and soon found out. A football match. Philip was bewildered. What's that? The servant replied. It's a new game invented by Baron Wesson not long ago, and everyone loves it. Today's the hammer versus fishhook game, and there's talk of a fight between Baron Wesson and his master, Lord Richardnell. Philip was even more confused. Frederick and Richardnell fighting? What the hell was going on? Maria was the first to grasp the point, happily saying, is Frederick playing a new game again? Should we go check it out? Philip figured, since Frederick was there, he might as well go check it out. Is this a fortress? Philip was a bit shocked when he first saw the football field. It was a standard pitch surrounded by wooden stands, and from the outside it looked like a fortress. A while ago, a refugee camp had been set up outside Wessenland. There was no shortage of labor, and the refugees could be put to work for just a few steamed buns each. There were several fenced-off passages outside the field, and people were lining up to enter. Then Philip made another discovery. On one side of the field, many people wore the suits Frederick had invented, and those who weren't wearing suits also looked to be wearing fine clothing. On the other side, however, some wore a blue shirt and trousers vaguely resembling suits, while others wore clothes made of cheap fabric. Hey, isn't that Baron Eltel? An elderly man in a white robe approached Philip, upon seeing him near the carriage. As a diplomat from the Duchy of Mainz, Philip knew many dignitaries and recognized him immediately as the Archbishop of the Rhine Archdiocese of the Church of Light, a position on par with the Archbishop of Mainz. He immediately saluted and greeted him. Greetings, Archbishop Victor. Maria, standing nearby, saluted gracefully. Victor returned the greeting and asked, are you here to watch the game, too? Philip bowed slightly and replied respectfully, Your Excellency, I just arrived in Wessenland and saw a lot of people coming, so I came along to see. Victor smiled and said, don't be so reserved. Everyone is equal on the field. Just call me Victor. Let's go watch the game. It's going to be a great match today between Frederick and Richardnell. Hold on, it's going to be crowded. Philip, Maria in tow, followed Victor into the aisle in the middle of the field. There were no tickets at the moment. Admission was coin-operated. Tickets were very cheap, only 4 copper coins for adults, free for children like Maria, and half price for taller people. Ticket revenue was divided between field maintenance and the teams. Some people would throw in a little extra, but Archbishop Victor simply tossed in a gold coin. Entering the field via the stairs, Philip looked at the large expanse of grass and said, this is big enough for a night's tournament. The field was a standard pitch with a running track outside and billboards lining the track, making it look quite formal. Victor simply smiled and led the father and daughter to a good table. The seating area was a long staircase with no numbered seats. This area was filled with scholars and priests, all sitting together. A number of uniformed men walked by, carrying beer barrels on their backs. In their bags were disposable cups made of slime, lids, and straws. 2 copper coins would buy a beer or a glass of juice. Victor bought 2 beers and a glass of juice, then told Philip about today's competition. I came to see Frederick a while ago, he said after a few sips of beer. Back then, when everyone was quitting work, he had a ball made and started playing with everyone. Later, as more people started playing, some acquaintances formed teams and competed against each other. Frederick couldn't compete with the adults, so he became a coach. Something got into an argument a few days ago, so today Frederick is leading the Hammers, a team of blacksmiths, against the Fishhooks, a team coached by Richardnell and made up of merchants, clerks, and landlords who often go fishing in the river. Look! Victor pointed to the sides of the field. Those blue-collar workers are supporting the Hammers, and the white-collar workers on the other side are supporting the Fishhooks. Philip asked and realized that in Wessenland, craftsmen wearing blue canvas clothes are now called blue-collar workers, while clerks and merchants, wearing white shirts, are called white-collar workers. Victor then explained the rules of football to him. They were simple: kicking the ball into the goal earned 1 point, and there were certain fouls that could injure people. Cheers erupted from the field as people entered. The first to enter the field were 4 referees wearing black trousers and short-sleeved t-shirts. The lead referee was Psyche, holding a black and white soccer ball. The loudest cheers on the field were for her. As she blew the whistle, the players from both teams began to enter. The Hammers wore red jerseys, symbolizing fire, and black shorts, representing charcoal. The Fishhooks wore light blue jerseys and shorts, representing the river, with numbers printed on the back. They looked very respectable. "Ah, it's Frederick," Maria jumped up, pointing at the short man in a black suit at the back of the Hammers. Victor glanced at the little girl beside him, looking thoughtful. With a whistle, the game began. Chapter 50 Football Match. 5 minutes into the match, Frederick, like the rest of the spectators, was already in full swing. The players on the field had only been playing the sport for 2 weeks and had no real skills to speak of. Remember, don't touch the ball with your hands. Winning was a matter of course. But precisely because of this, the players displayed a ferocious ferocity on the field, fiercely fighting for every inch of turf. The intense competition instantly ignited the spectators' passions. From sailors and farmers to porters, shop assistants, accountants, and scribes, everyone cheered and roared in unison, their voices echoing a kilometer away. During a throw-in, Philip suddenly calmed down. He surveyed the frenzied crowd and shuddered. If this enthusiasm had occurred elsewhere, Philip shuddered. The first goal came in the 15th minute, marking the Fishhook team's opening goal. On the bench, Richard Knoll's face lit up with a smile. Playing such a physical game against ordinary people was no challenge for someone with his extraordinary strength. Even his physical prowess was a minor setback. He preferred to use his brain to devise tactics and lead his team to victory. Frederick listened to everything he said, applying it to other situations and generating numerous insights. The Fishhooks were white-collar workers, like businessmen and clerks. While they certainly lacked the physical strength of blacksmiths, they had one advantage: their quick minds. Because their work required collaboration, they all had a knack for coordination. The Hammers, on the other hand, were different. They mostly worked independently, with one person handling everything, and rarely passed a ball. So, Coach Richard Knoll devised a strategy that minimized physical contact and focused on passing, especially from long distances. This not only distracted the opponent but also prevented them from running back and forth and wasting energy. This strategy worked well. The Hammers players were quickly drawn into a frenzy by the Fishhook's long balls. Some, in their frustration, rushed forward, eventually creating a gaping hole that led to a one-on-one duel. The Fishhook's supporters were instantly overjoyed. However, the Hammers quickly took the lead. Around the 25th minute, from a corner kick, their striker, using his physical strength to outmaneuver the opposing defenders, secured a header, and then scored. However, the Fishhook team repeated their old tricks, using long balls to rip the opponent's defense open and score 2 goals before the end of the first half. Frederick simply smiled and then, with a smile, told his players to return to the large tent outside the field to rest. The players' current level was just so-so. If they were in Football Manager, none would have a skill stat higher than 3. He couldn't raise them all to 20 at once. However, the blacksmiths still had their strengths. They still had a chance to turn the tables in the second half. The second half began quickly. Maria, holding a half-full glass of juice, asked Philip, "Father, will Frederick lose?" Philip, sensing a clue, shook his head and replied, "I don't know, but I think he'll have a way." A few minutes into the game, Archbishop Victor remarked, "The Hammers are different from the first half." Philip nodded, "Yes, a little different." Richard also noticed the change in their opponent's performance, but didn't pay much attention to it. Frederick's lip curled slightly. The blacksmiths had one strength: obedience and discipline. The blacksmith's shop was a dangerous place. Blacksmiths who disobeyed the rules would either be burned or otherwise injured. So during the break, he reiterated the rules, urging everyone to stick to their own areas. The guys finally learned their lesson. Now everyone stayed in their own areas, pressing anyone with the ball while the others watched their opponents in their own areas. This tactic was particularly effective in a duel between weak teams. The opponent's pass error rate was already high, and now with someone rushing towards them, their nervousness made the passes even less accurate. The Hammers capitalized on these miscues and launched a counterattack. turning the game into a back and forth. The blacksmith's physical strength was too much for the weakened merchants and clerks to withstand, and the fishhook defense was quickly overwhelmed. The fans loved this kind of back and forth game, and amidst roars of cheers, the hammers equalized in the 60th minute. At this point, the fishhook players' mentality shifted. The merchant players, like gamblers who'd lost money, were filled with passion and led the entire team in a relentless attack, immediately reclaiming the ball. Seeing their chance to turn defeat into victory, the blacksmiths also played with a frenzy. The match quickly intensified, with each team scoring a goal. Psyche blew her whistle periodically, summoning priests from the Church of Light to treat injured players. The fans' enthusiasm also rose, and when their voices grew hoarse, they bought a beer and continued chanting. In the final 15 minutes, the fishhook, already exhausted, used up their 5 substitutions. Thanks to the fresh energy of their new players, they not only held off the Hammers' attack but also took a 2-goal lead. Frederick had previously substituted his 2 most energetic midfielders, leaving him to play as a full-time defensive midfielder in front of the penalty area, specifically to disrupt the opponent's attacks and thus curb the opponent's fresh attack. He then used up his remaining 3 substitutions, bringing on 2 wingers and forward Bryant, and simultaneously implementing the previously agreed-upon tactic. Ding, ding, ding. The fishhook's iron goal frame endured its most brutal test since the start of the match. Richardson wiped the sweat from his forehead. He hadn't felt so terrified in years. Frederick felt helpless. The long balls and lobs, combined with Bryant, the tallest player on the field and an unstoppable header, were effective, but his accuracy was questionable, and many of his shots hit the goal post, wasting opportunities. A player passed by, and Frederick said to him, "Tell Bryant to aim at the goalkeeper's face." 5 minutes later, the Hammers equalized. The final 5 minutes were incredibly tense. One side saw a potential win now lost, while the other was on the verge of victory. Both sides were so excited that they deployed a 0-0-1-0 formation and received 3 red cards. In the final moments, the Hammers seized on the fishhook's 0-0-1-0 formation to launch a final counterattack. Their first shot was blocked by the goalkeeper, but a following winger found the net. Just then, Psyche blew the final whistle. The stadium instantly erupted in excitement. Frederick wins. Maria leaped for joy. On the carriage back to Wesson, the tired little girl relaxed and fell asleep. Archbishop Victor, who was riding with him, asked Philip, "What did you think of today's game?" Philip had completely calmed down. Although he had never seen combat, he had served as a diplomat for the Grand Duke of Mainz during the previous year's war, negotiating with various parties and had gained some first-hand knowledge of warfare. Morale, unity, he simply stated something that any intelligent political being could see. If Baron Wesson can make everyone in his territory do this, he won't fail. Yes, Victor agreed. Baron Wesson has a bright future. He then mentioned something seemingly insignificant. "I have a little news. Someone in the Nuremberg City Council is planning a motion of no confidence in the current mayor." Philip narrowed his eyes slightly and replied calmly, "Thank you for informing me of this, Your Excellency." End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.